Chapter 312. The development of the matter did not exceed Fan Xian's expectations. The great grandmaster of the Qin kingdom, who traveled the world like a lone swan, still did not return to the capital. The Yi family quietly accepted the arrangement and was forced to separate themselves from the entire defense system of the capital. Of course, in the middle and lower levels of the arrangements, they still had some power left, but they were unable to make too big of a splash. They had already lost the power to directly influence the future of the court. If this had happened and Yi Luyun had returned to the capital, the seemingly solemn and amiable emperor in the palace would have shown his most ruthless side. Even if it meant damaging the strength of the Qin kingdom, he would have eliminated the Yi family. A noble family that controlled the capital and was about to marry a prince. Most importantly, they had the support of a great grandmaster. If they had shown the slightest intention of rebelling, it would have been forcefully suppressed. In the end, Yi Luyun did not return to the capital. This meant that the Yi family had no choice but to accept the current situation. Of course, for Yi Luyun's sake, the emperor saw that the Yi family had never truly weakened their loyalty, and would not make things too difficult for the Yi family. Yi Zhong was still stationed in Sangzhou, and his title of nobility and military service had not been reduced. His rewards were even greater than before. Even the straightforward and somewhat cute Gong Dian had committed such a great crime, but the emperor did not punish him severely. He only took away all of his military service, gave him 30 strokes of the cane, and demoted him to a commoner. The Yi family felt wronged, but for the stability of the Qin kingdom, they could only make this sacrifice. Fortunately, they could use this opportunity to leave the capital, a place of trouble, and it was not necessarily a bad thing. In reality, the ones who were most disappointed were the eldest princess, who was far away in Xinjiang, and the second prince, who was currently under house arrest in his manor. How preposterous! Fan Xian looked at the council report that Mu Tai had sent him and could not help but shake his head. After the Yi family temporarily retreated, the defense of the capital was something that everyone in the court was watching. The position of commander of the Jingdo garrison had fallen into Qin Heng's hands, and the most important position, the commander of the imperial army and the minister of the imperial bodyguards, which had always been held by one person, had been split in two by the emperor. The minister of the imperial bodyguards was temporarily vacant. According to the news from the palace, it should be eunuch Hong who was temporarily in charge. And the commander of the imperial guards was actually the first prince. Fan Xian was referring to the emperor's appointment. In the history of this time and space, there had never been a precedent of a prince taking the post of commander of the imperial army. What? It was precisely because he was afraid that those audacious princes would use their soldiers to rebel. However, the emperor had given the position of commander of the imperial army to the great prince. There was also a crown prince in the eastern palace. What was the emperor thinking? The first prince's birth mother, Lady Ning, was an eastern barbarian. Logically speaking, the throne should never have fallen to him. Mu Tai did not dare to respond. He reported to Fan Xian the recent work of the first bureau. Seeing that the commissioner seemed to be tired, Mu Tai quickly excused himself. "Teacher, take a break." In private, Shi Chanli was still used to calling Fan Xian teacher and not sir. He looked at Fan Xian's complexion, which was clearly lacking in qi and blood. His heart ached as he said, "The emperor has given a clear edict for you to not be involved in council affairs for 3 months. It is clear that he wants you to rest well, yet you refuse to listen." His teacher was very fond of him, and as a student he felt a little proud of himself. Fan Xian shook his head and jokingly scolded him, "Why don't you stay at Baoyue brothel? Why do you come to my study every day?" Shi Chanli gave a wry smile and said, "That place, it feels wrong to stay there." Fan Xian laughed and chased him out. He also told him to call Deng Ziyu in. Deng Ziyu entered the study, and Fan Xian's face immediately became serious. He asked, "What is the council's conclusion about the white-clothed assassin?" Although he knew that it would be impossible for him to dig out the secret in Qin Pingping's heart, it would be a shame to give up the resources that the old cripple had in his hands and not use them to make guesses. Deng Ziyu shook his head and said, "Although the emperor called out the assassin's identity in the hanging temple." He gave a wry smile and said, "Sir, you know that the emperor is not a martial artist. His words cannot be trusted. Sigu Jian did have a younger brother, but he has been missing for many years. Everyone is guessing whether or not he was killed by Sigu Jian when he took over Dongyi. So, the council has been very careful in expressing their opposition." Fan Xian was a little surprised. He was surprised that the Overwatch Council did not get rid of this tale under Qin Pingping's guidance. Or was it that Qin Pingping was confident that the Shadow's true identity could not be guessed, and so he did not do anything? But, Deng Ziyu said the second but with embarrassment on his face. Since your majesty has said that he is Sigu Jian's younger brother as officials, it is not appropriate for us to directly object. Particularly, we do not know if your majesty's casual words will affect the movements of the court in the next few years. Fan Xian laughed. The Qin kingdom loved martial arts and everyone knew that. Last year, when he was assassinated on Yolan Street, the emperor used this opportunity to send troops to the north and take back a large piece of land. Now, all of the officials were used to the emperor's habit of finding excuses to go to war, and they did not dare to try to be clever. As for the matter of the hanging temple, Fan Xian should have personally gone to the Overwatch Council to interrogate the eunuch and look at the assassin's body. But he knew how muddy the waters were, and he was still thinking about whether or not he should get too involved. Another reason was that, in his current physical condition, none of his family, including his father, would allow him to leave the manor. He did not dare to leave. Young Master Fan, who valued his life as much as gold, had lost all of his jinqi. He did not know when he would be able to get it back. He was extremely disappointed, and he was especially careful about his own safety. Of course, Fan Xian would not reveal his true situation to anyone. The door to the study was pushed open with a creak. The guards outside did not respond. Fan Xian lay on the bed and turned his head to look. It was indeed Wan'er and his sister. Deng Ziyu saw the faint anger on the faces of his wife and daughter, and he knew it was time for him to leave. He bowed and respectfully retreated. Fan Xian wanted him to tell Bingyun to come to the manor, but he did not have the opportunity to do so. You said you would take care of yourself, but you just don't want to. The sister-in-law and sister-in-law worked together to change his dressing and feed him medicine. They also tried to persuade him. Fan Xian gave a wry smile and said, "Maybe it's because I didn't think of a good name. I can't stay idle." Not only could he not stay idle. Ever since Fan Xian left the palace and returned home, the Fan Manor became the busiest place in the capital. Every day, officials from the 3 departments, 3 temples and 6 ministries came to visit the commissioner. Countless nobles came to visit, and officials, regardless of faction, all came to show their goodwill. On the South Street in front of the Fan Manor, the black carriages were like clouds, and the gift boxes were like dragons. The people who came to the Fan Manor gave him all kinds of precious medicine. There was no way Fan Xian could eat all of it by himself. Aside from the truly valuable ingredients, the rest were given to the Baoyue brothel. The assassination in the Hanging Temple made Fan Xian once again the most powerful official in the Qin kingdom. Compared to his sudden rise to become the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, this time, he had saved the emperor as a cornerstone. He appeared to be much more solid and stable, which made the officials of the Qin kingdom secretly fear him. The officials were not blind or deaf. After Fan Xian was injured, he was kept in the palace for many days. And according to the news from the palace, the emperor did not sleep much the night Fan Xian was treated. Only Qin Pingping, the lonely old man, could compare to the emperor's favor. Many people were carefully trying to curry favor with the Fan Manor, but in their hearts they were not completely convinced. Especially the brave young people, they could not help but be jealous of Fan Xian's good luck. When the emperor was assassinated, why were they not by his side? This time the family earned a lot of money. Fan Xian was speaking seriously and he was not joking. In his previous life, if a county was sick, it would cost at least tens of thousands. Furthermore, he was a high-ranking official in the Qin kingdom, where bribery was becoming more and more common. "It's been hard on you, master?" Lin Wan'er smiled lightly, and fed him some medicine like she was coaxing a child. She was of noble birth and did not care about the flattery of the officials. Fan Xian, who was recuperating, was not in the mood to receive the officials who claimed to be there to see him but were actually expressing goodwill. These officials all had their own backgrounds, so Minister Fan could only suffer. Other than routine ministry work, most of his time was spent greeting the guests. Fan Ruoruo complained, "These people came once and they took turns to come again. Aren't they afraid of annoying me? All the officials are fine." Lin Wan'er suddenly thought of something and her face showed admiration. She looked at Fan Xian and smiled. "The scariest one is the royal doctor. That old man is a very patient man. He came 4 times and you refused to see him. In the end, even the emperor sent word to him that you would not go to the Imperial Academy of Medicine, but he still refused to give up. As a matter of fact, I heard from Master Teng that the royal doctor came again today. He is sitting in the study room and he refuses to leave. A cup of tea has turned into water, and he pretends not to see Master Teng's expression." She sighed. "What a powerful man." Fan Xian laughed bitterly. Although he didn't say anything, he admired the thick-skinned Qing Kingdom's #1 imperial doctor. That night in the palace, the royal doctor had no confidence in his medical skills, but that did not affect his decision to stay in Guangxin Palace and secretly learn from him. Later, he discovered the wonders of Fan Xian's medical skills, and made up his mind to bring Fan Xian to the Imperial Academy of Medicine. At the very least, he wanted Fan Xian to pass on his strange medical skills. His determination was strong, and he repeatedly visited Fan Xian and refused to leave. His methods were shameless and strange. In the eyes of the doctors of the Qing Kingdom, surgery was naturally incomparably magical, but Fan Xian knew that he was just lucky at the time, and there were some crucial problems that made it very difficult to spread this knowledge in the current world. He tilted his head to look at his sister, who was carefully adjusting the bandages around his wound. He suddenly thought of a possibility but immediately shook his head. The three of them were alone in the study room and the atmosphere was just right. Unexpectedly, someone gently knocked on the door. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. "A guest has come to visit," the servant outside the door reported respectfully. This time even Lin Wan furrowed her brows. "Didn't I say I wouldn't see anyone?" Fan Xian smiled bitterly at the great prince who had come uninvited and said, "It's so convenient to be in the palace. You didn't go to the plum garden to see me, why have you come today?" Lin Wan also pouted. "Brother, there are many people in the manor right now. Why have you come to join in the fun?" The great prince looked at her helplessly. He had watched this sister grow up. She had only been married for a year, and all her thoughts were on her husband's family. There isn't much to talk about. The brother and sister bickered a bit more, and the great prince had no choice but to admit defeat. Using a trick of moving flowers to catch jade, he said in a low voice, "The great princess has also come with me. She is talking to Lady Fan. Sister Qin, you should go and see." The great princess he spoke of was the woman who had come all the way from northern Qi for a marriage alliance. Fan Xian was slightly surprised. He hadn't thought that the man and woman had cultivated such feelings before marriage, and that the palace allowed them to come and go as a pair. He then thought of the few conversations he had with the great princess on the way back, and couldn't help but be surprised. Lin Wan'er and Fan Ruoruo were incomparably curious about this foreign princess, whom they had only heard of but never seen. Furthermore, they knew that the great prince must have something to say to Fan Xian, so they rose to leave. The study room quieted down. Fan Xian raised his right hand slightly, indicating that the great prince should have some tea. In a quiet voice he said, "Congratulations, Your Highness." Naturally, he was congratulating the great prince for taking the position of commander of the imperial army. The great prince's eyebrows rose and then immediately relaxed. He said lightly, "What is there to congratulate? I was originally the general of the Western expedition." Fan Xian smiled. "Although I have been demoted by 2 ranks, how can the central command of the imperial army be the same as the Yin Mountains on the border?" The great prince looked at him, unsure if there was some other meaning hidden in his words. After a moment he said, I do not want to be the commander of the imperial army. I would rather go to the north and replace Yan Xiaoyi." Fan Xian shook his head, thinking that the emperor had sent Yan Xiaoyi far away and had the Yi family firmly under his thumb. He was guarding against that crazy woman in Xinjiang. If you go to the north, of course Yan Xiaoyi will be happy, but the emperor will be very unhappy. Don't tell me that the great prince came to see a sick person like me today to talk about his unhappiness in the workplace. He laughed lightly. I can be a competent listener. Not just a listener. The great prince stared into his eyes. Although he didn't understand what the word workplace meant, he said, I want to ask for your help. He called himself I, not the great prince. Fan Xian noticed this change and began to feel slightly nervous. It seemed that this great prince who had Dongi blood in him was very serious in asking for his help. Good heavens! He sighed bitterly in his heart and looked at the great prince. Your Highness, the commander of the imperial army is a very important position. The emperor trusts your loyalty, and that is why he made this arrangement. Fan Xian is an official, how can I make such presumptuous comments? The great prince shook his head. Fan Xian, to tell you the truth, when I first returned to the capital, I did not think much of you. When I was in the West, I heard that there was an immortal poet in Jingdo. But I am a general and I have never believed in such romantic things. How can they help the people of the world and the court? He then changed the subject. But after returning to the capital for a few months, I saw that your actions were ruthless and pure, and that you were very talented. Not to mention the fact that you made things difficult for the second prince, but the incident in the Hanging Temple changed my opinion of you. And in the palace, You were able to cure your near-death injury. The prince, whose face was slightly dark, said solemnly, "Now, I cannot think of anything in this world that can trouble you. So in this matter you must help me." Faced with countless compliments, Fan Xian fell silent. Qin Pingping had once said that the great prince in front of him was different. Since he was young, he had purposely stayed away from the palace. He wanted to be as far away from that chair as possible. Now, the emperor, who killed without a blade, was going to drag him into muddy water. No wonder he wanted to resist in his anger. The great prince's power was mostly in the military, and the court did not have many talents in the field of strategy. But the fact that he had come to find Fan Xian was unexpected. Although Fan Xian was happy to see that among these brothers, there was one who could maintain a rare open-mindedness and brightness, and he sympathized with the other's situation, he still shook his head firmly. "Your Highness, it is not that I do not dare, it is not that I do not want to, it is that I cannot. After all, Fan Xian is only an official. The Overwatch Council cannot meddle in the affairs of the court." The great prince sighed. His visit today was a bit presumptuous and even risky. But looking around the capital, other than Fan Xian, who else could he go to? Could it be that in the end he could only go to Qin Garden again? The emperor has made up his mind and no one can change it. "I think your Highness does not need to go to Qin Garden again. But I am a bit curious, your Highness, what decision did you make today? In your eyes, I don't think I'm a kind and benevolent official." Fan Xian seemed to be able to guess what he was thinking. The great prince slowly drank the fragrant tea in his cup and said, "Fan Xian, you can hide it from others but you cannot hide it from me. Do not forget I was also in the Hanging Temple at the time. Based on the fact that you first saved my little brother and then father, I know you are a person worthy of trust." Fan Xian was silent. He did not think that the values formed in that world would make the emperor and the great prince both have a strange kind of trust in him. The great prince came today to express his attitude to the Overwatch Council. At the same time, he hoped to get some useful hints from Fan Xian. However, since Fan Xian maintained his silence, it was not good for him to be too rash. With Wanner acting as a bridge between them, if the situation in the capital changed in the future, he did not expect the Overwatch Council to help him. But if Fan Xian could reveal some useful information, that would be enough. "I heard the royal doctor is in your manor, and has already come a few times?" He awkwardly changed the topic. His long years on the horse had made him not very familiar with the curves of officialdom. Fan Xian laughed in his heart and explained, "He wanted me to take a position in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. After the emperor refused, he wanted me to go teach students there." It was supposed to be a casual conversation, but the great prince became serious. He said, "Fan Xian, I also think you should go to the Imperial Academy of Medicine. That night I stood guard outside Guangxing Palace. Seeing the serious expressions of the royal doctors, I knew your medical skills were very good." He curiously asked, "Actually, many people in the capital are wondering how you could allow Miss Fan to work on your own stomach. The royal doctors have already made you sound like a god." Fan Xian gave a wry smile and said, "Don't believe them. Everyone knows that Fei Jie is my teacher. If they were 4 years old and were digging up graves every day, opening up corpses that were soaking in water, they would be as good as I am. So that's how it is. It seems that nothing can be explained by the word genius." The great prince sighed and continued, "Of course, the Imperial Academy of Medicine is not as powerful as the Overwatch Council, but it is more peaceful. The idea of the royal doctor is very simple. If your medical skills were taught, who knows how many lives could be saved." He looked into Fan Xian's eyes seriously and said, "Saving people is better than killing them. And I have been in the army for many years, so I know what a good doctor means to those injured soldiers. Why would I teach them medical skills? To benefit the world. The royal doctor must be thinking the same thing?" "Exactly. Your Highness, so your secondary purpose today is to help the royal doctor persuade you. No wonder the topic changed so strangely earlier." Fan Xian laughed. Seeing him laugh so proudly, the great prince's face gradually darkened. He said, "Do you think we are all talking nonsense?" In fact, it was close to nonsense. Asking Fan Xian to give up his position as commissioner of the Overwatch Council and become a medical professor was something that no one could have persuaded him to do. But the royal doctor and the great prince, these two pedantic people, had said it directly. Fan Xian stopped laughing and found that the wound on his chest was slightly painful. He was shocked and said, "I am not making fun of you. On the contrary, I do have some respect for the royal doctor. There were many problems that could not be solved in surgery. The first was anesthesia, the second was disinfection, and the third was the equipment. Currently, the standards of this world were not enough to solve these problems." Fan Xian used chloroform to anesthetize him, and he used hard resistance to disinfect him. These were all built on the foundation of his strong physical strength. If it had been an ordinary person, they would probably have been drugged to death or died from complications. As for the equipment, it was even more difficult to solve. Fan Xian and Fei Jie had thought about it for a few years, but in the end they could only use the power of the third bureau to make a set. If they could not even stop the bleeding, what was the point of making an operation? Using words that the great prince could understand to explain these reasons, the great prince finally understood. This kind of medical skill was a relatively powerful one. It used the injured person's body to fight against the drugs at the tip of the knife. If Fan Xian had not practiced martial arts since he was a child, he would not have been able to survive. Thinking of the soldiers in the Western Expedition Army who had been injured by arrows and died, he felt some regret. He slapped his thigh and sighed. Is there no better way? For some reason, Fan Xian's mind floated back to his sister's surprisingly steady hands. He comforted him. There are some basic things. In a few days, I will have Ruoro go to the Imperial Academy of Medicine to consult with the royal doctors. The great prince nodded and said, earlier, you seemed to be disapproving of the words benefiting the common people. This was the doubt in his heart. On the surface, Fan Xian was a powerful official who put profit above all else. But after observing him from the sidelines, the great prince felt that his ambitions were not limited to this. Fan Xian was quiet for a while, then said quietly, there are many ways to benefit the common people. Saving lives is not the only way. The great prince did not understand. For example, Your Highness. You have been in the West for many years, fighting with the Hu people and killing countless people. He said with a smile. But you have prevented the Western Hu from invading. Is that not benefiting the common people? No matter how steady the great prince was, he had to accept this flattery. Another example is me. Although everyone thinks the Overwatch Council is just a sinister and terrifying secret agency, if I can use it in my hands and do my best to lean on the right path, make the Qing kingdom unbreakable, and the people can live and work in peace and contentment, is that not benefiting the common people? Perhaps the goal is the same, but there are many ways. The more Fan Xian spoke, the more excited he became. He was very much like the middle school Chinese teacher from his previous life. He told the story of Lu Sun abandoning medicine to become a scholar with a smile on his face. Of course, it was an old story from 1,000 years ago that he had come across in an ancient book written by Zhuang Mohan. The great prince was stunned. Saving the people's bodies is not as good as saving the people's spirits? He slapped his thigh and said, but the Qing kingdom is not as weak as the country in the story. Why is there a need to use words to educate people? These words were true. The Qing people's simplicity carried a fresh sense of progress. It was very different from the air that Lu Fu found difficult to breathe at the end of the Qing dynasty and the beginning of the Republic. Fan Xian smiled and said, so, not only am I abandoning medicine, I am also planning to abandon literature. What do I count as? Abandoning medicine to enter politics? Abandoning the pen to join the army? The great prince still did not agree with his point of view. You are indeed a genius. Why don't you demonstrate everything you have learned? If you can make this world a better place. Fan Xian waved his hand with some difficulty and said, most people want to change this world, but very few people want to change themselves. Note 1. I thought that we should reform ourselves first. Decades ago, there was once a woman who wanted to change this world. In the end she died. Fan Xian did not want to follow in her footsteps. He was more afraid of death and more selfish. As they spoke, a clamor suddenly came from outside the window. The sound was joyous. The great prince glanced at him and said with a smile, looks like the edict to reward you has finally come. Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly and didn't say anything. Hidden in his clear eyes was only worry for his own body. That was all. He did not rush to worry about the world. Note 1. This is a QQ signature that I happened to see. At the time, I thought it was very interesting. I immediately thought of countless Qing Chuan, Ming Chuan, Tang Chuan, and other worlds. Fan Chuan will not walk the path of changing the world. One reason is that I am lazy and he is also lazy. The second reason is that he is too damn diligent. The third reason is that my level of knowledge in certain areas is very poor. I can't write it. For example, surgery. I really don't know how to do it. If there is something absurd and laughable, please just laugh it off and forgive me. P.S. No more P.S. I ran away in tears. I copied a poem and put it here. It will be used later. A dream of glory, half a piece of scholarly papers, the waves of the sea are thousands of zhang. The hooves of horses shatter the frost of the forbidden street, listening to the rooster sing several times. Dusty clothes, the heart of the Jianghu. Out of the royal phoenix net, admiring Qi Shouyang, sighing that Han Peng did not end. Early in the paper, the demonic form. Author. Wang Yuanting. The above does not count. Chapter 313. The person who came to Fan Manor to announce the edict was Eunuch Yao. With the sound of 3 cannons, the Fan Manor busied themselves for a while before setting up the incense table and setting up the routine. Everyone in the manor waited in the great hall. The great prince and the northern Qi princess did not find it convenient to stay in the manor, so they left. However, the imperial doctor remained resolutely in the study. The imperial edict entering the manor was a major event. Even Fan Xian was forced to be carried out of his bedroom. Fortunately, the palace remembered that he was recovering from his injuries, so they ordered him not to get out of bed to receive the edict. It could be considered a special favor. He listened to Eunuch Yao's sharp voice and found that the emperor had indeed rewarded a lot of things this time. It took a while for him to finish reading them. Naturally, he did not take these rewards to heart, so he did not listen carefully. On the contrary, he felt that the eunuch's voice was very hypnotic. Lying on the warm and soft couch, his eyelids were slightly closed. He was about to fall asleep. Minister Fan coughed gently and used his gaze to remind Fan Xian. After a slight shock, Wanner gently pinched Fan Xian's palm. Only then did he manage to open his eyes. In the end, he only heard something about 500 bolts of silk, how many mu of land, how many gold ingots, how many silver ingots. In the end, there was nothing new. The Fan family lacked everything but not silver. This was something that the Qing people knew, so the emperor was not prepared to make too much compensation to Fan Xian in this area. He only had Fan Xian restore his title of nobility and conveniently raised Fan Jian by 1 rank. Father and son shared the glory. After the official edict was announced, everyone in the hall silently dispersed. Only then did Eunuch Yao begin to quietly read the emperor's secret edict. The secret edict was not secret, but the benefits of this edict could not be announced everywhere. Fan Xian's spirit rose. Hearing that the emperor had transferred 7 tiger guards to him, only then did he feel that the emperor was not too stingy. In his joy, he unconsciously left out the emperor's other 2 edicts. Presently, what he was most worried about was his own personal safety. Next year he was going to Jiangnan. Who knew if he would be able to recover his Jinqi at that time? Uncle Wu Zhu was increasingly not taking his life seriously. He still had to rely on himself. Outside the garden, Fan Xian saw the 7 familiar tiger guards. The leader was Gauda. These tiger guards had accompanied him on a diplomatic mission to northern Qi a few months ago, so of course they were acquaintances. Now that they had been sent by the emperor to protect Commissioner Fan, they were very happy. Staying with Sir Fan Jr. was much more comfortable than staying in the darkness behind the emperor. Furthermore, Sir Fan Jr. was skilled in martial arts, so they did not have to worry too much. Led by Gauda, the tiger guards with long knives on their backs half knelt on the ground and saluted Fan Xian in unison. "Greetings, Commissioner." Fan Xian coughed twice and smiled. "Rise. We are all old acquaintances. From now on, my life depends on you." The tiger guards thought Sir Fan Jr. was joking, but they didn't know how to respond. They laughed dryly, not knowing that Fan Xian was speaking the truth. With the 7 tigers by his side, even if Haitang suddenly went crazy and wanted to kill him, he would not be afraid or helpless. "Go see father first." Fan Xian gazed at Gauda and said in a quiet voice, "Although normally you shouldn't do this since you are going to follow me, there is no need to be too cautious." Gauda nodded. He was very grateful to Commissioner Fan for pointing it out. He walked excitedly toward the front of the manor in a rush to see his old boss. Embroidered pillow? Fine wine. Clothes? There's even a musical instrument? Fan Xian was in his room. Only now did he begin to listen carefully to the list of rewards. He glanced at his wife and forced a smile. "Although I was once a functionary, I never knew how to play this. It's just the rules of the palace," Lin Wanner explained. Lin Wanner explained. Seeing Fan Xian's hesitant expression, she did not say that the rewards included things like toilet bowls. At this moment, the garden in the back of the manor was a mess. Teng Zijing was outside the manor arranging for people to receive the rewards from the palace, while the Teng family was busy in the storeroom sorting things. If there were some important things, they had to come to the room to ask for the young mistress's permission. Seeing the wife of the Teng family sweating profusely from running in the cold, Fan Xian couldn't resist sighing and saying, "Is this a reward or punishment?" The wife of the Teng family beamed and said, "Even if it's a stitch or a thread, it can't be sloppy. This is all a blessing from the palace. In all of Jingdo, who else can receive so many rewards at once?" The young master has gained a lot of face this time. Rewards can't be eaten, Fan Xian said self-mockingly. Using one's life to exchange for face, it's better to not want it. Lin Wanner opened her mouth almost at the same time as him. Both husband and wife looked down on this reward. One probably still felt that the emperor's uncle had bad intentions and hoped that the more generous the reward, the more her husband would block a knife for him in the future. The emperor is truly stingy, Fan Xian said with a smile. When you reported the amount of gold and silver, I listened carefully. That amount is truly pitiful. Lin Wanner smiled and said, You still care about that? Just a meaning. The more complicated the reward, the more it shows the emperor's concern for your injury. How can I not care? Fan Xian raised his brows and said, Our family is completely relying on that bookstore to support us. It's not good to have to go to the front manor and ask my father for a use, right? He does have a lot of silver in his hands, but I can't always live off the elderly. The words live off the elderly were simple. Lin Wanner vaguely understood. She smiled and saw that there were no idle people in the room. In a quiet voice she teased, Don't you have a brothel? I hear that one can earn tens of thousands of liang of silver a month. Fan Xian laughed in spite of himself. That's Xiao Shi's. Don't push it on me. Lin Wanner faked a spit at him and muttered, In front of your own family you're still pretending. Don't you find it tiring? I have to pretend at all times. It's best if I can even fool myself. Why did Big Brother find you earlier? Lin Wanner opened her eyes wide and asked curiously. Fan Xian thought for a moment and said, He doesn't want to be the commander of the Imperial Army. He wanted to see if I had any ideas. Lin Wanner furrowed her brows slightly and said, Given Big Brother's personality, he certainly doesn't want to stay in the capital. Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, Who wants to stay in the capital? However, the emperor does not feel at ease leaving such a son, who is so good at fighting, to always lead troops outside. These words were rather bold and sinister. Wanner's heart couldn't help but tremble. You're becoming more and more careless with your words. I can only speak more plainly in front of you, Fan Xian sighed. Fan Xian sighed. I am willing to help His Highness, but I am just an official. I have no right to speak on these matters. I really do not know how His Highness is so blinded by lard that he has the courage to speak so clearly to me. Perhaps Big Brother thinks, for my sake you won't harm him. Lin Wanner smiled bitterly. Ever since he was young, his way of thinking has always been this simple. The water in Jingdo is too deep. I've swum for half a day and found that I still haven't reached the bottom. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, When we go to Jiangnan in the spring, you and I will go together. We will strive to stay there for a while longer and truly stop for a while. I just don't know when the time comes. Will the court give you the identity of an imperial envoy to investigate the palace treasury first or directly give you an empty position? Lin Wanner analyzed seriously. If I have the identity of an imperial envoy, I can't bring my family. If in name I have to stay in Jiangnan for a long time, it's fine for me to go. Fan Xian shook his head and said, Who cares how they arrange it? In any case I am going to take you. These words are unreasonable, Lin Wanner said with a smile. There was a bit more sweetness in her heart. She also understood that given Fan Xian and her identity, no matter how much they broke the rules, no one dared to say anything. However, she didn't know whether or not the ladies in the palace would agree to her going to Jiangnan. Her body had been weak since she was young. The furthest she had gone was the winter she had spent in the Tsang Mountains last year. Hearing Fan Xian say that it seemed that she might go to the legendary picturesque Jiangnan to see, she was very happy. Don't overstep the bounds. She suddenly thought of something. Looking at Fan Xian, she said, Although the emperor has sent a secret edict for the tiger guards to protect you, the people of Jingdo will eventually know. Although you are heavily injured and the tiger guards have a good reason to come, the tiger guard's identity is different. It will be very eye-catching by your side. Fan Xian stretched out his hand to stroke the slightly prickly beard on his lips and said with a smile, Relax, the emperor is a clever person. The reason he had the tiger guards come to the manor is to protect you, the princess. A knocking sound came from outside the room. Fan Xian shook his head angrily. He was not angry that someone had come to disturb him at this time. Rather, he found that after he had lost all his jinqi, he was far less sensitive to the changes in his surroundings. At least, he could no longer hear the sound of approaching footsteps far in advance. Fan Ruoruo led the imperial physician into the room. Seeing that Lin Wanner was also in the room, the imperial physician hurriedly bowed in a panic and then turned his face away. The Qing kingdom was not like northern Qi. It did not have as many rules between men and women. Furthermore, the imperial physician was old enough to be Wanner's grandfather. His pedantic action immediately made everyone in the room laugh. Father said that since you are in good spirits, you should talk to the imperial physician. Fan Ruorwo looked at her brother with a pained smile. Fan Xian's heart chilled. He knew that his shameless father had finally been unable to withstand the imperial physician's painstaking efforts and had pushed him to his pitiful son to handle. However, he had long made up his mind about the request of the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Smiling merrily, he gazed at the imperial physician and said, "Sir, I understand why you have come." The imperial physician opened his mouth to speak, but Fan Xian quickly stopped him. "However, with my appearance, it is impossible for me to leave the manor to teach." He looked at the old man's angry expression and said, "However, I will dictate some content in the manor, print it into a book and send it to you." The imperial physician stroked his beard and seemed to feel that this was a pretty good result. After a moment of silence he said, "It's just that in the way of medicine the most important thing is to teach personally. It's not very appropriate to just look at books." Fan Xian took a few breaths and said, "After the book comes out, if there are any difficulties I will have Ruorwo explain it." They didn't make a sound for a long time. "Can't sleep?" "Yes. I slept too much in the middle of the day. What about you? Why can't you sleep today? I remember when we were in the Tsang Mountains, you slept like a kitten every day. Speaking of cats, I wonder how Xiao Bai, Xiao Huang and Xiao He are doing. Master Ting took them to the country estate. You were the one who told him to do so. Why are you thinking about them now?" Fan Xian opened his eyes and smiled. Lin Wanner quietly muttered, "You were the one who said cats were bad for pregnancy." Fan Xian was startled. He smiled bitterly and didn't say anything. He couldn't tell her that he actually hated cats in front of her, could he? Whether it was the old cat or the kitten, seeing their lazy and cunning faces made him angry. "Husband, am I very useless?" Lin Wanner turned her body to the side and breathed on Fan Xian's face. "It's a bit itchy. Help me scratch it." Fan Xian motioned for his wife to scratch his face. He asked curiously, "Why did you suddenly ask this?" Lin Wanner gently scratched his ear. In the dark, she pouted her lips and said, "The people around you all seem to have their own strengths. They can all help you. Xia knows how to do business and Ruorwo wants to learn medicine. She is famous for being a talented woman in the capital. Young Master Yen helps you take care of things. Let's talk about Hai Tang in the north." Fan Xian coughed violently. He almost tore open the wound on his chest. Wanner gently touched the area above his wound. "She is also a strange woman. I'm afraid she also wants to bring peace and stability to the country. Only I have been weak since I was a child. I was spoiled by so many people in the palace, but I can't do anything. I can't do anything. I can't do anything." Fan Xian understood what his wife meant. After a moment of silence he said, "Wanner, there are some things I haven't told you. In life it's not good to be useful and it's bad to be useless." He said gently, "These roles are actually not what people like us are willing to play. For example, my initial wish was to be a wealthy and idle person. Take Yen Bingyun for example. In fact, he is not willing to be the head of a spy for the rest of his life. It's not like you did not see the situation between him and Miss Shen. And for me, Wanner, you are very special." A gentle smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips, but his gaze did not look at his wife by the pillow. "You grew up in the palace. It was such a dirty and dangerous place, yet it did not change your temperament. You grew freely like a green lotus and I, who was lucky, casually plucked it. This in itself is a rare thing." Wanner listened to these words of love. Her heart was filled with sweetness, but she still felt sad. But, in the end, Fan Xian stopped her from continuing. "Wanner, you are very capable. Even your brother can't say he can beat you at mahjong." The husband and wife laughed. "Plus, I know what you are really good at." Fan Xian was silent for a moment, then said very seriously, "You are much more experienced in judging the direction of the court than I am. And your vision is very accurate. After the spring examination, if you hadn't been active in the palace, I wouldn't have been able to live so freely. I believe that if you were to help me plan and strategize, your ability would be no less than Yen Bingyun's. It's just, Lin Wanner opened her bright eyes. They were strangely calm. "It's just what?" "It's just that I don't want you to be involved in these things," Fan Xian said decisively. "These things are too dirty. I don't want you to get involved. You're my wife. I have a responsibility to let you live a relaxed and happy life. I don't want you to be sad all day long. I am a male chauvinist," he concluded with a smile. "At least in this area." After a long time Warner sighed. There was a trace of satisfaction and comfort in her sigh. She said quietly, I am a member of the royal family. In the future there are some things you shouldn't let me hear. Although I know you trust me, you also said that these things are very dirty. It is difficult for a husband and wife to avoid it. I don't want you to suspect me in the future. I would rather you not tell me those things. Her marriage to Fan Xian was arranged by the emperor. There was a clear hint of politics in it. But the heavens were kind, allowing this young man and woman to use a chicken leg as a matchmaker and talk about their love through the window. Compared to a normal political marriage, it was much more stable. But in the face of politics, what did it matter how close a husband and wife were? This kind of tragedy was not rare in history. Furthermore, the eldest princess was her birth mother, so Warner's words were not pretentious at all. She was not taking a step back in order to advance. She was truly thinking for Fan Xian. Don't think so much, Fan Xian said calmly and firmly. Fan Xian calmly and firmly said, if a person lives one's life and cannot even trust the person closest to them, then what need is there to continue living such a pitiful life? What he wanted to say was, if he had a chance to start his life over again, but he had to constantly be on guard against the person next to him, then he would rather not have been reborn. The first snow fell in Jingdo. Small snowflakes floated to the ground. They melted as soon as they touched the mud and were difficult to accumulate. The damp and cold in the private residences gradually grew heavier. Fortunately, the Qing kingdom was at its peak and had abundant supplies. Even the homes of the common people did not have to worry about keeping warm. From a distance, one could see the places where the common people gathered. The black eaves of the houses gave off wisps of mist. Presumably there were heaters in the houses. It was a very ordinary carriage. After making countless turns in the capital, it finally arrived in front of the courtyard of a private residence with its own gate. It was a cold day and no one was on the streets. It was quiet all around. Naturally, no one saw the face of the person who came out of the carriage. Deng Ziyue carefully lifted Fan Xian into a wheelchair and pushed him into the small courtyard. Fan Xian was wearing a large cloak with a collar that reached past his neck. It was very warm. He put his hand to his lips and blew out a breath of hot air. He glanced at the young man in the corner of the courtyard, who was chopping firewood under Su Wenmao's instructions. He was slightly surprised. The young man's features were somewhat familiar. His upper body was bare, and he did not show the slightest fear of the cold in this winter. He kept chopping firewood. This is Sea Lily's brother? Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked at the young man. It seemed that he wanted to see the shadow of the girl from Northern Kingdom in him. Deng Ziyue softly grunted. After Sir gave the order, the director issued a warrant, and we took him out of prison. Lady C has entered the Northern Qi Royal Palace. His identity is a bit sensitive, and it is not easy to settle him down. After asking for instructions last time, we arranged for him to be sent here. Fan Xian nodded. This small courtyard was his only private property. Apart from himself and the Qinian unit, probably only Qin Pingping knew about it. It was the safest place. The reason why he had come here today despite his injuries was because His Majesty had transferred the Tiger Guards to him. Although the existence of these Tiger Guards could ensure his safety, there were certainly eyes and ears for His Majesty among them. Thinking that it would be difficult for him to come here so easily in the future, he had braved the snow to come here today. This Master C is a reckless man. For his sister he ran from Northern Qi to the Kingdom of Qing. There is no guarantee that he won't run out of this courtyard in a few days. Fan Xian clenched his fist and coughed lightly. Keep a close eye on him. If he makes any strange movements, kill him. Deng Ziyue expressionlessly responded. He pushed Fan Xian into the room, and the wheelchair rolled over the muddy snow on the ground. An Overwatch Council official came out to greet him. Seeing the commissioner in the wheelchair, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. It seemed that he was hallucinating that the Kingdom of Qing had produced another terrifying Qin Pingping. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 314. The manor next to Xinjiang Road in the capital had never had many people staying there. The main task here was to pass on Fan Xian's orders and receive information from Shangjing's Wang Qinian. Sea Lily's brother and the others all lived in the wing. The room was set aside for Fan Xian to work in, so naturally, there was no way to light a fire. Although they knew the commissioner was coming today and had already sent out a heater, there was still a lot of cold in the room, and it couldn't be dispersed. Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair, feeling the cold in the room. He couldn't help but shake his hands and smile bitterly. You can't even bear to light a heater? Is the manner that poor? Deng Ziyu was warming an inkstone on the stove. He called for his subordinates to bring some hot water to melt the frozen brush. Hearing Fan Xian's words, he smiled bitterly. Sir, you've been busy these days and you've been injured. The servants didn't prepare for you to come today. With great difficulty he was almost done. Fan Xian propped his head up and watched Deng Ziyu desperately grind the ink block against the warmed inkstone, mixing it with warm water. It was as if he was sharpening a knife. After a while he finally ground out some juice. Fan Xian nodded with satisfaction. It seemed that his new confidant's skill was not much worse than that of a royal doctor. He dipped the melted brush into the inkstone, dipped it in some ink and wrote a few words on the snow-white paper. Damn, the ink froze again. What kind of weather is this? Fan Xian was furious. He threw the charred brush on the table and cursed. How come it's not this cold at home? Deng Ziyu felt a gust of cold wind blowing around the room. He carefully replied, the furnaces in the Fu are much better. When we first bought this courtyard we did not prepare them. We did not even have time to heat up the Kong bed. I'm not sleeping here, Fan Xian said angrily. Fan Xian said angrily, you and Lao Wang are both so stingy. Back then I gave Wang Qinian 1,000 liang of silver, and he only spent 120 liang to buy this rundown courtyard. Do you want to freeze me to death? Deng Ziyu felt some sympathy for his predecessor, who was far away in northern Qi and was being scolded by the commissioner every day. He carefully said, it's peaceful. It's not just quiet. Fan Xian glanced at him and said hatefully, it's called cold. If the officials in the capital were to see this, I'm afraid they would really think the Overwatch Council is just a small yamen. He had a few important letters to write today so he couldn't care less. He tried his best to use the brush but in the end he couldn't use it smoothly. After struggling for a while he finally gave up. He slammed the desk and shouted, give me that brush. Deng Ziyu dawdled for a while and finally took out a pen from his close-fitting clothes. As he was about to hand it to Fan Xian, his expression became cautious. This pen is expensive. I heard that the palace treasury doesn't have much left. Please use it sparingly. Fan Xian snatched it and looked at him with disdain. It was just a pencil. Why was it so expensive? When we go to Jiangnan and find a few more graphite mines, the pencil business of the palace treasury will naturally start again. At that time I will ask the palace treasury to make 2 baskets for you to carry. 1 basket for you to write until you die, and the other basket for you to play on the street. The pencil glided across the snow-white paper like the toes of a beautiful woman dancing on smooth ice. Occasionally, it scraped up a few traces of ice and snow. Deng Ziyu knew that the commissioner was writing a secret letter, so he tactfully retreated. In the cold study, Fan Xian was the only one writing with the broken end of the pen. The mist that came out of his mouth appeared and disappeared on the paper. It looked very strange. The contents of the letter were also very strange. Although it was a secret letter from the Overwatch Council, the implications of the letter were too great. Furthermore, the writing of the pencil could be erased, so Fan Xian was not at ease. The language used was rather vague, and important sentences such as the time involved were all in code words. The letter was addressed to Wang Qinian, and it was about the Cui family. Because the Cui family had been persecuted in the capital, in order to help the second prince in Xinjiang raise money, they had no choice but to move a large amount of smuggled goods to northern Qi. However, the channels there had never been opened, so there was a phenomenon of stockpiling goods. Currently, the goods that the Cui family had moved from Xinjiang as well as the warehouses in the north, accounted for about 1/6 of the annual production of the palace treasury. From this ratio, it could be seen how bold the eldest princess had become after all these years of controlling the palace treasury. She did not hesitate to seek personal gain. The current situation was the result of Fan Xian and Yan Bingyun spending a few months attacking the second prince and squeezing the Cui family dry. He had been waiting for this moment. He wanted to eat the other party clean in one bite, not even spitting out a bone. At the end of the letter to Wang Qinian he wrote, it's time to eat. Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair, slightly tilting his head. He gently rubbed the area above the wound on his chest. It was wrapped in bandages and it was a little itchy. After writing the letter, his hand was already numb from the cold. Suddenly he began to miss the time in Danzhou when Cici would help him copy books every day. When he was copying books, this girl would place his hand in her embrace to warm it. His hand was plump and it felt good to the touch. His heart fluttered and he picked up the brush to write again. This second letter was addressed to Haitang Duo. However, when he wrote, his heart held a wanton heart, so the words in the letter were a little presumptuous and occasionally provocative. Ever since he had returned from northern Qi, his correspondence with Haitang had never stopped. He had long gotten used to having a pen pal in the north. After all, the two of them were powerful figures of the younger generation of two countries. It was necessary and beneficial for the future to maintain a smooth channel of communication. In the letter, he talked about the recent gossip in Qin Kingdom's capital. Of course, the hanging temple incident was also included. Although the assassination of the Qing emperor had shocked the world and northern Qi had long reported in detail, as the person involved, he told the story with much more vividness than in a book. He also said a few other things and secretly pointed out that he was preparing to take action against the Cui family. He wanted her and the unknown boy or girl emperor to cooperate with him. At the end of the letter, he copied a poem to prove that he was still as talented as usual. I have come to repay a debt of gratitude, but it is not all profit and glory. The ancients died for their bosom friends, afraid that their bones would be frozen and buried in the courtyard. How can the people of the middle court miss me? Heavy coats and thick shoes float with beautiful tassels. I have heard that the north is even colder. I wonder how the people live. These were the last few lines of Sima Guang's bitter journey. Fan Xian read it over with some pride and rubbed his slightly stiff hands together. He felt that the poem he copied was too appropriate. Furthermore, the words between the lines were filled with bemoaning the state of the universe and pitying the fate of mankind. It would probably make Haitang think for a long time. It was not worth it to deceive a girl to death. This was exactly what he liked to do. After confirming that he had not missed anything, he sealed the letter and pressed the wax. Suddenly his heart jumped. He felt as if his desire to pour out his heart had not been completely satisfied. Facing the normal-looking girl on the other end of the letter, who was shaking her head like a village girl, he felt that he was facing an old friend. For a moment he sank into silence. Then he spread out another piece of white paper and thought for a moment before raising his pen and writing, "Duo, how are you?" The previous letter was considered official business. This one is just a casual chat. Today Jingdo had its first snow in the 5th year of the Qin calendar. It came earlier than usual. I thought that the snow in Shangjing would be even heavier and the weather even colder. That day in your vegetable garden, I saw a few wintersweet at the corner of the fence. I wonder if those wintersweet blossoms have bloomed and moisturized the monotonous appearance of the white snow. How are the ducks you raise? Be careful, don't freeze to death. My side is fine. Xiao Huang, Xiao He and Xiao Bai are all raised in the country estates outside the capital. I heard that the workers there treat these 3 big fat cats like their ancestors. How could there be any problems raising them? Everything is fine for me. I eat and sleep, sleep and eat. My house is quiet. These 2 days, my sister has been busy in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. I heard that she has become a rare sight in the capital. Wana went back to Lin Manor today. That cute brother-in-law of mine has been neglected recently, and his temper is a little bad. I wonder what you were doing at this time? Fan Xian wrote casually, as carelessly as if he were speaking. He simply wrote whatever came to mind. Right, that student of mine, surnamed Sher, opened a brothel. Business is good and the food is very exquisite. If one day you travel to the Qin Kingdom, I will accompany you. I suddenly remember the name of that restaurant in Shangjing. I have forgotten the name of that restaurant, but I do remember that the wine was good that day. I said a lot of nonsense to you, but I don't know how much you remember. Speaking of which, I have read your previous letters a few times. I can't bear to read them. You are a saintess. Don't learn the style of those noble young ladies. They always like to put poems in their letters. Although I have the fake title of immortal poet, I have no interest in correcting essays. Last time you said Sea Lily was doing well. Let's not talk about this in the future. I've always held a grudge against her and I don't know why, but I especially hate hearing news about her from you. Duo, come to the Qin Kingdom to play. My wife is also very curious about you. Also, by the way, can the martial arts of Tianyi Dao be taught to outsiders? Recently, I have suddenly become very interested in your training methods. This seemingly natural question revealed the shamelessness and treachery in the depths of Fan Xian's heart. The snow outside seems to be getting heavier. The young man outside is still chopping firewood. Young people are always hot-blooded. Although I'm still young, I don't know why, but my heart is showing signs of old age. Looking at the people around me, it's hard for me to be interested. I'm tired, bored. The wind and snow outside are howling, perhaps urging me to start writing. Alright then, let's stop here. The stove in the room is too broken and the temperature can't be raised. Although I still want to talk to you, I feel that there's no need to go against the coldness of God. Also, please help me take care of him. Thank you and may he be well. Although the letter was natural, there was still a lot of useful information mixed in. He read the letter again and added a sentence at the end, "Wang Qinian, if you dare to peek again, I'll ask Mutai's nephew to peek at your daughter bathing." Why is there one more than usual? Deng Ziyu opened his eyes wide and looked at Fan Xian. He counted the letters in his hand. "There are 2 for Miss Hai Tang? Why are you asking so many questions?" Fan Xian said. "Same old routine. Escort her all the way to Shangjing." Deng Ziyu nodded and walked out of the room. He handed the sealed letters to the member of the Qinian unit who had been waiting outside. The man counted the letters in his hand and asked the same question. "Why, are there 2? Deng Ziyu looked at him and the corner of his mouth twitched unsightly. He took a deep breath and said, "Why are you asking so many questions?" The 2 of them looked at each other and nodded. They stopped talking, thinking that the commissioner was using the Overwatch Council's top-secret mail route to send love letters. It was a bit extravagant. Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair and left the courtyard of Xinjing Road. He got into the carriage and went to Lin Manor, ready to take Wan'er and Dabao home. In the carriage, he suddenly asked, "Is there something strange about the position of Minister of the Imperial College? Also, I have long since left Taichung Temple. Why am I promoted to Vice Minister of Taichung Temple?" Deng Ziyu first explained, "There are 2 Vice Ministers. Vice Minister Ren is the main one and you are the deputy. But this is a nominal position and you don't have to go there every day. The Minister of the Imperial College is in charge of 7 schools, and both of these positions are of the upper 4th rank." He reminded him, "Sir, although you can no longer be a court official after taking over the position of commissioner, the court has not issued an edict to remove you from these 2 positions. This time the emperor has given you these 2 nominal positions. Presumably, it is only to show that the emperor favors you and there is no other meaning." Fan Xian shook his head. These 2 positions were the last 2 in the emperor's edict. At first he did not think much of it, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. The emperor was a man of deep thought, and he would never use an official position as a mere steamed bun. These 2 positions, is there anything special about them? He frowned and tried to organize his words. After thinking for a long time, Deng Ziyu replied with some uncertainty, "The position of vice minister is common, and there is nothing special about it. It is just that Taichung Temple is in charge of miscellaneous matters in the ancestral temple, and it is more convenient to enter the palace. The minister of the Imperial College has not appeared in recent years. After a few new policies, the positions have become a bit messy." He suddenly slapped his thigh and said happily, "I remember now. In the past, the minister of the Imperial College had to enter the palace to give lectures to the princes, and he was the assistant of the Grand Tutor." Fan Xian was stunned and his mouth opened wide. He was speechless for a long time. He finally understood why the emperor had arranged these 2 positions for him. Vice Minister of Taichung Temple and Minister of the Imperial College. Wouldn't that make him the teacher of the princes? More accurately, wouldn't he be responsible for disciplining the little bastard 3rd prince? Thinking of this, he turned pale with fright and cursed, "I don't have the time to enter the palace every day. Aren't we going to Jiangnan? How could you arrange such a terrible thing for me to do?" With a creak, the carriage seemed to have been stopped by his scolding. The curtain was lifted slightly and in the light snow, he saw that the front of the carriage was blocked by a eunuch and a few palace guards. Eunuch Yao looked at Fan Xian in the carriage and his eyebrows trembled in fear. In a trembling voice he said, "Sir, let me find a good one. Come with me quickly, the emperor has summoned you to the palace." 2 chapters behind schedule. I didn't control it well. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author, support the original reading. Chapter 315. I woke up late today. Someone was having a birthday celebration at home and I wasn't feeling well, so I woke up late. Eunuch Yao had gone to the Fan Manor first. He did not find Fan Xian in the manor. He didn't know where the commissioner, who was currently recovering, had run off to. Even the minister did not know. That special Lady Fan Jr. was also not in the manor. He could not find anyone to ask about Fan Xian's whereabouts. But the emperor was still waiting in the palace. Eunuch Yao was worried sick. After finding out that Lady Fan had returned to Lin Manor, he led the guards in that direction. Coincidentally, they bumped into this carriage at the intersection. If the guards hadn't recognized one of Fan Xian's attendants, they probably would have missed it. Seeing Eunuch Yao gasping for breath, Fan Xian sighed. "I still have to go back to Lin Manor. Why am I being summoned now?" The emperor had summoned him and he had responded so calmly. Eunuch Yao was worried sick. He had never seen an official who didn't take the summons of the palace seriously. He had always been on good terms with Fan Manor, so he couldn't say much. He only said, "The emperor's edict has been out for a long time. If you go any later, I'm afraid the emperor won't be happy." Fan Xian grimaced. "Of course I have to go." He couldn't bear to see the old eunuch standing in the snow. He invited him into the carriage and the group headed for the palace. He arranged for someone to go to Lin Manor to inform his wife. "Lao Yao, tell me the truth. What happened?" Fan Xian rested against the wall, his eyes narrowed. He didn't look at the head eunuch. Fan Manor had always fed the eunuchs well, so he didn't feel like handing over any more banknotes. Eunuch Yao didn't dare accept banknotes from Fan Manor anymore. He laughed. How would a servant know? You'll know when you go." Fan Xian shook his head and pretended to be angry. "You don't do things properly." He paused. "I need to ask about something." Eunuch Yao pricked up his ears. He looked around the carriage to make sure there was no one else around. He lowered his voice. "Sir, what is it? I'll tell you anything I dare to say." "Last time in the Hanging Temple, what happened to the eunuchs?" Fan Xian frowned. Eunuch Yao shuddered. After a slight pause, he raised his palm and placed it flat against his throat, making a cut. Fan Xian's expression did not change, but no one knew what he was thinking. He knew that this was the inevitable result. There was an assassin among the eunuchs, so the people present naturally could not escape death. He was afraid that the palace would have to purge a large number of them. "Where's old Dai?" "No." Eunuch Yao sighed and said, "He is an old man. The emperor can trust him. However, he has been implicated and can no longer stay in Taiji Palace." Thinking about how the Imperial Censorate reported on the matter of his good-for-nothing nephew 2 months ago, his life in the palace was very difficult. Later, the emperor, with great difficulty, gave Lady Shu face and promoted him to use again. He glanced at Fan Xian. Fan Xian didn't say anything. Eunuch Yao did not know just how deep the fate of banknotes between Fan Xian and Eunuch Dai was. Who would have thought that there would be another assassination attempt? Old Dai's luck can be considered to be extremely bad. As a matter of fact, he's been stripped of all his duties and he's been flogged a dozen times. He's been sent to the treasurer's office. Such an old man doing hard labor in this cold weather. Eunuch Yao and Eunuch Dai had entered the palace the same year. Although there was usually conflict between them, seeing the other person collapse at this moment, he couldn't help but feel a bit sad. He rubbed his sleeve at the corner of his eyes. "Old Dai, endure for a few days and wait for the emperor's anger to subside. It's good enough that I can keep my old life." Fan Xian shook his head and then asked, "Then who is on duty in Taiji Palace now?" "Hongzhu." Eunuch Yao looked at Fan Xian's confused face and explained in a small voice, "A young brat. This year he started running the path of Taiji Palace and being on duty. The emperor likes him for being efficient. The matter of issuing edicts is also given to that." "Hongzhu?" Fan Xian asked curiously. Eunuch Yao shook his head and said, "What right does he have?" The carriage had just passed Zinjiku when it was called to a stop by Eunuch Yao. Deng Ziyu was a bit dissatisfied. After all, the square in front of the palace was very wide. In this snowy winter, to have the commissioner, who had not yet recovered, sit in a wheelchair was truly too much. They weren't afraid of him freezing. "Officials, there's nothing we can do," Eunuch Yao said with grievance. Feeling wronged, Eunuch Yao said, "After what happened last time, the imperial army was reorganized. Now these soldiers are all staring at everyone like wolves. Looking at the situation, they want to scare away everyone who enters the palace." Fan Xian listened for a bit and then said, "Don't make things difficult for Eunuch Yao, let's get off." Deng Ziyu glanced angrily at the palace doors. He carried Fan Xian off the carriage and placed him on the wheelchair. He quickly opened the large black cloth umbrella and covered the commissioner's head. Behind him, there were already Overwatch Council officials pushing the umbrella. Snowflakes hit the black umbrella and made a slight sound. Eunuch Yao didn't have such good luck. He used his hand to cover his head and rushed toward the palace doors with a few guards beside him. Fan Xian's entire body was shrunk into the large cloak to hide from the cold wind blowing toward his face. Half his face was covered by the fur collar. He still felt a chill seeping into his clothes. The light above his head was dim and the sound of snow falling was mournful. The imperial soldiers outside the palace doors gave Eunuch Yao the procedures and looked in shock at the group of people slowly walking in the middle of the square. In the wind and snow, the group of cold-faced plain-clothed officials was pushing a wheelchair. There was only a black umbrella on the wheelchair that firmly blocked the snowflakes falling from the sky. Not a speck of snow fell on the person in the wheelchair. The director wasn't summoned into the palace today? The captain of the Imperial Army asked in surprise. It's Commissioner Fan. Everyone was startled. The captain of the Imperial Army quickly led a group of people to welcome them. They helped the person in the wheelchair block the wind and snow outside and brought this group of people to the palace doors. After a slight inspection, they were allowed to enter the palace. The northern wind blew and the snowflakes floated. Deng Ziyu pushed the wheelchair and walked through the long side path beside the main hall. As the color of the palace walls grew darker and darker, he finally stopped in front of the door on the right side of the palace wall. A eunuch had long opened a large plain umbrella and securely covered Fan Xian's head. Surrounded by people, he carefully led the young injured person into the back palace. Deng Ziyu stood outside the door of the back palace and watched the commissioner move further and further away under the escort of the eunuchs. Although his expression was calm, no one knew what he was thinking in his heart. A snowflake floated down and landed on the corner of his eye, making him narrow his eyes. Not in the royal study? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and temporarily ignored the cold wind blowing toward his face. He asked Eunuch Yao beside him. Earlier, there had been news that the emperor had long waited for Commissioner Fan and had already lost his temper. The young eunuchs received Fan Xian and did not dare to be slow. It was as if their feet were on flaming wheels as they sprinted toward the depths of the palace. The wheelchair they pushed creaked, and the eunuch holding the large plain umbrella swayed left and right. If it were not for the fact that the terrain in the palace was flat, this mad dash would have long torn open Fan Xian's wound. Eunuch Yao ran until he was out of breath. He replied, In the bedroom. Fan Xian's heart was slightly surprised. His expression was not very good. Eunuch Yao watched and only remembered that this young official was still injured. The emperor could not wait, but if he allowed the commissioner's injury to worsen, he would not have a good time either. Only then did he quickly have everyone slow down. He scolded Fan Xian in the face and turned his face to the side in an attempt to curry favor. Sir Fan Jr., are you all right? Fan Xian nodded and said, Not that expensive. In a moment, everyone had arrived at a place in the palace garden. It was not the bedroom where the empress was but where Yi Guipin was. Eunuch Yao hurried forward and went inside to report. Not long after, someone came to receive Fan Xian. Today the emperor was wearing a set of casual clothes and was sitting on a warm couch, talking casually with Yi Guipin. The third prince was sitting obediently to the side, copying something. Seeing the eunuchs push Fan Xian in, he stopped talking and calmly turned his head to look at Fan Xian. You're injured. Why aren't you staying in the manor to recover? Why are you running around? An emperor seemed to be reprimanding a young official, but he was actually concerned about him. Logically speaking, the official should be grateful to him. Fan Xian laughed coldly to himself. If he really cared about him, why would he wait 17 years to show this? If he really cared about his injury, why was he in such a hurry to summon him into the palace? But his face was still slightly moved. He calmly replied, Your Majesty, I've almost recovered. That's why I sneaked out for a stroll. I was just about to go to the Lin Manor to pick up one or return to the Lin Manor? There's no one in the manor, except for that idiot. The emperor didn't seem to like associating his niece with the Lin Manor. He looked a little unhappy. Yi Guipin peeked at the emperor's expression and laughed foolishly. She changed the subject. Fan Xian, you haven't recovered from your injury, yet you're running around. Aren't you afraid Minister Fan will beat you? The emperor was a little surprised. He immediately laughed. Fan Jian, how could I bear to? Although it was a joke, there was another meaning behind it. Fan Xian shivered slightly. He piled a smile on his face and didn't respond. The emperor glanced at the third prince, who was copying a book to the side. He said to Fan Xian, A few days ago you organized a few books of classics at the Imperial College. I had Qingping study them these days. The tutor thought they were too deep. What do you think? Qingping, go see the commissioner. The third prince's surname was Li, and his name was Qingping. According to the customs of the kingdom of Qing, princes were very respectful to their officials. The emperor's order was not surprising. The third prince quickly put down his brush and carefully walked in front of the wheelchair. He bowed to Fan Xian. How can I do this? Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair, unable to avoid it. You are now the Minister of Education of the Imperial College. This is part of your duty, the emperor said calmly as if he was talking about something normal. Yi Guipin could tell that the emperor wanted Fan Xian to be the third prince's teacher. Thinking of Fan Xian's reputation in literature and martial arts, as well as his influence in court politics, Yi Guipin couldn't help but smile. The more she looked at Fan Xian, the more she liked him. The emperor saw her expression and couldn't help but laugh. Look at how happy you are. The reason Yi Guipin was favored was because, at least on the surface, she didn't hide her thoughts. When she was happy, she was happy. Hearing the emperor's teasing, she didn't panic. She laughed and said, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for finding a good teacher for Pinger." Fan Xian listened to the two elders talk to themselves. He felt bitter in his heart. He wondered why no one had asked for his opinion on this matter. The third prince came over holding a scroll. Fan Xian took it and glanced at it. He raised his head and reported, "Master Zhuang's knowledge of the classics is excellent. The Grand Tutor thinks that it is reasonable for him to have a deeper understanding. However, these are only introductory things. It is not a problem for the third prince to study them in advance." The ruler and official exchanged a few more casual words. Fan Xian responded carefully, but he knew that the emperor would certainly have something to say to him. As expected, after drinking a bowl of hot soup, the emperor opened his mouth in a seemingly casual manner. "The snow outside has stopped. Chushua Ingshi, Fan Xian, accompany me to the garden for a stroll." "Yes, Your Majesty." The emperor stood. Yi Guipin smiled slightly and placed a large red embroidered fox fur robe on his body. By the time they left Shufang Palace where Yi Guipin lived, the snow had already stopped. The ground of the royal palace was clear and wet, but there was no accumulated snow. There were only a few traces of snow on the winter trees in the garden. The sky was gray and white. The red walls, yellow eaves, snow branches and green bricks were very beautiful. There was not a trace of impurities in the air. It was unusually fresh. The emperor walked in front with a large cloak draped over his shoulders. A young eunuch pushed Fan Xian silently behind him. Along the way, the eunuchs and serving girls wearing cotton robes stayed far away. Those they met on the side of the road leaned to the side and didn't speak. "There is no need to kneel when seeing me, snow or rain." Seeming to guess what Fan Xian was thinking, the emperor quietly said, "This is a rule I set after I ascended the throne. Kneeling here and there every day, don't they find it annoying? If their clothes get dirty and torn, don't they need silver from the palace treasury to buy them?" Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair and quietly loosened a cloth button on his collar. After the snow and wind had stopped, he felt a little hot. Hearing the emperor's words, he knew that the topic was going to turn toward the palace treasury, but he shamelessly refused to follow up. Seeming angry at Fan Xian's silence, the emperor coldly asked, "Where is the second son of the Fan family now?" At this time, they had already arrived at a garden in the most secluded part of the palace. In front of them was a small lake. On the lake was a stone bridge that led to the pavilion in the center. There was some residual snow on the pavilion, but it was difficult to hide the black stone's austere aura. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 316. The light snow had just stopped, and the cold air in the palace accumulated. The might of heaven was indeed difficult to withstand. However, Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair and felt very warm. The high-collared cloak he wore blocked the wind and snow, and he even felt a little hot. As for the emperor's questions, he had long been mentally prepared. He had never expected his family to secretly transport Fan Xizha out of the capital and hide it from many people. "I just received a letter the day before yesterday. He has already settled down in Shangjing." Fan Xian glanced at the young eunuch behind him, intentionally or unintentionally. The emperor was in the mood to travel in front of him, so he did not notice the exchange of glances between the two people behind him. The young eunuch was Hong Zhu. He looked at Commissioner Fan's smiling gaze. For some reason, his heart suddenly chilled and a glimmer of fear grew in him. Hong Zhu knew that this commissioner was warning him that some words could not be passed into other people's ears. This young eunuch had been at the emperor's side recently and deeply understood that a ruler should maintain a silent attitude. He quickly lowered his head, not daring to meet Fan Xian's gaze. Hong Zhu also wanted to climb up the mountain that was Fan Xian. How would he dare to go around announcing things that were not good for the Fan family? "You just said it like that?" The emperor walked toward the other side of the lake as he lightly said, "I originally thought that although there are many things that the people under heaven know, some superficial effort still has to be done." Fan Xian lowered his head and rotated his neck, letting his cheeks rub against the soft fur on his collar. "Your Majesty has asked, and I dare not speak a word of falsehood." The emperor suddenly stopped walking. The young eunuch quickly pulled on Fan Xian's wheelchair, not daring to sit next to the emperor. Fan Xian didn't sit firmly and furrowed his brows. You don't tell lies to me, but you dare to brazenly lie to the people under heaven? The emperor turned his head and looked at Fan Xian with a not quite there smile. The few wrinkles at the corners of his eyes revealed a slight smile, but also a hint of questioning. Fan Xian raised his head and looked directly into the emperor's eyes with a bit of impoliteness. There are many foolish people under heaven. I am only loyal to the emperor, not to the common people. But someone once said. The emperor's gaze suddenly became a bit strange. The people are most important, the state comes second, and the ruler is light. Nonsense. I don't know who was so daring. Fan Xian frowned slightly. Of course he knew who would be so daring. The original creator was Mencius, and the plagiarist was his mother. The Ministry of Justice is still searching for your brother. The emperor laughed and turned around to continue walking forward. Are you not afraid that I will punish you? Hong Zhu pushed the wheelchair and followed. Fan Xian listened to the squeaking of the wheels and felt a headache coming. He shook his head and said, The emperor is wise and will certainly understand my difficulties. Difficulties? The emperor laughed coldly. I'm afraid that it is only now that the second prince feels that he has difficulties that he cannot voice out, right? Ah, this subject is guilty. Fan Xian knew that at this moment he should pretend to be slightly frightened like those officials who were close to the emperor in Qing Palace dramas. But he knew that it was the emperor's own idea to bring the second prince down from his throne. He was just a knife. Moreover, in the heart of the emperor he was not a simple official. After all, that relationship was at work. Thus he did not feel a glimmer of fear or nervousness. So, no matter how much he put on his acting, it was still superficial and a bit exaggerated. He dragged out the words, this subject is guilty, a bit too long. The sense of drama was too strong. The emperor lowered his voice and scolded, even if you're acting, you don't know how to be more serious. Fan Xian replied with a pained expression, this subject is guilty. Repeating it over and over meant that the subject was guilty and the subject was guilty. Fortunately, the three of them had already stepped onto the wooden bridge in the middle of the lake and temporarily stopped talking. Although Jingdo was already very cold, it was the first snow, so the lake water was certainly not cold enough to freeze. It was still green under the bridge, rippling coldly. Although the wooden bridge was built smoothly and sturdily, the wheelchair still felt a bit unsteady on it. Fan Xian's hands gripped the handles of the wheelchair tightly. His eyes stared at the gaps between the wooden bridge, thinking that if the eunuch behind him suddenly turned into an assassin, he would be in trouble. In front of them, the eunuchs and serving girls who had come to clean and decorate the pavilion bowed from a distance and then disappeared without a trace. They did not dare to stay by his side. The emperor sat on a cushioned stone bench and used his gaze to indicate for Fan Xian to bring himself a cup of hot tea to drink. He used 2 fingers to pick up a pine nut and slowly peel it. The eunuch, Hong Zhu, tactfully retreated to the side of the pavilion. One reason was to keep watch, and the other was to be ready at any time for any orders from his masters in the pavilion. How is it? The emperor asked. Fan Xian seemed to have been scalded by the tea in his cup. He furrowed his brows and immediately replied, Your Majesty, are you referring to my injury or the latter? Fan Xian replied very directly. We have already prepared to act. The council order has already been sent down. This matter has not gone through the council, so it shouldn't attract too much attention. The emperor nodded. Fan Xian continued to explain the details. Currently, all of the goods within the borders should be able to be intercepted. However, I'm afraid that if the northern Qi people get wind of it, they will also make a lot of money from it. After all, the Cui family has stockpiled a lot of goods in the north. In these words, he hid a very important piece of information. Even if you beat him to death, he would not tell the emperor that this was his plan to split the spoils with the northern Qi emperor. There are 3 routes to the north. Currently, the 4th Bureau has already begun to control them. As for the people in the palace treasury, because they have been with the people on that side for too long, they are not at ease. For now they have not been used. He furrowed his brows and explained Yan Bingyun's plan in great detail. However, before he finished, the emperor had already waved his hand and said, I don't want the details, I only want the results. Fan Xian paused and then said, Please rest assured, Your Majesty. At the latest, within a year, we should be able to recover most of the palace treasury's income. The emperor coldly shook his head. For the palace treasury to return to its former glory is an impossible matter. I think you understand the reason. Fan Xian lowered his head. The emperor asked, Let me ask you, Why are you so certain that I will support you acting against the second prince and the eldest princess? Because the court needs silver. After a moment of silence, the emperor grunted through his nose and said, if the court wants to do things and expand the borders, they need silver. These years Yunrui has emptied the palace treasury too much. I could not stand it anymore, so I wanted you to take over this mess. You did not disappoint me. First, you had the courage to take over. Secondly, you acted ruthlessly enough and did not fear the other party's identity. This is what I like about you. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your appreciation. Fan Xian could only thank the emperor because the matter involved the eldest princess. After all, she was his mother-in-law, so he could not rashly comment. The emperor picked up a pine nut and put it to his lips. He slowly savored the fragrance. Outside the pavilion, the wind had stopped and the snow had disappeared. There was a slight chill in the silence. Yi Zhong has returned to Zhangzhou. I have made Prince He the commander of the imperial army. I heard that there is a lot of discussion in the capital. Did you hear anything? The emperor seemed to ask very casually. Fan Xian smiled bitterly and replied, of course, discussion is unavoidable. After all, it does not seem to conform to old practice. Your opinion? Fan Xian was shocked. How could he have the right to give his opinion on such a matter? He quickly said, Your Majesty is far-sighted and calm. I dare not speak rashly. Speak. I forgive you of your crimes. The emperor did not look at Fan Xian's delicate face. He only focused his gaze on the winter tree in the palace garden. Fan Xian calmed down. He knew that talking to the emperor was a difficult matter. Wei Xiaobao had faked 90% of the truth, but in the end he had still been caught by Kangxi. And the things he had done in secret, sneaking into the palace, the agreement with Northern Qi, the conversation with Xiaoan, these were all hidden from the emperor in front of him. If it came to light, who knew what would happen to him? But the emperor in front of him was truly unfathomable. If Fan Xian did not have that natural advantage, he would not dare to play with him. The so-called advantage was that he knew the true relationship between him and the emperor did not know that he knew this. Thus, Fan Xian could play the role of a loyal official. The more apologetic the emperor felt towards him, the more benefits he could obtain. The great prince does not wish to stay in the capital, Fan Xian said directly. And for a prince to be demoted to a lower rank is against the rules. Most importantly, the palace is the heart of the kingdom of Qing. We must be careful. His words were very direct and even a little out of line. But the emperor did not have much of a reaction. He only coldly said, he does not wish to? 9 out of 10 things do not go one's way. He does not wish to stay in the capital. Do you think he can bear to see me, his father, guard the capital alone? Fan Xian, as a lobbyist, you are not very good. Fan Xian looked embarrassed. He knew that the great prince's visit to Fan Manor had not been hidden from the emperor. Don't make trouble with the second prince. If he calms down. The emperor closed his eyes and put an end to what had happened in the capital. Yes. Fan Xian nodded. He had already achieved his goal. What more was there to make trouble for? You have done a great service in the Hanging Temple incident, the emperor suddenly said. The emperor suddenly said, but as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, you allowed an assassin to sneak into the capital. Before it happened, the second bureau did not find out anything. This is your dereliction of duty. The two cancel each other out, so I can only reward you with those useless things. Do not feel resentful. I would not dare. Fan Xian replied seriously, it was a failure on my part. As for the injury, it was because I was not skilled enough. That was why I was injured by the white-clothed swordsman. The emperor suddenly became interested and asked, that swordsman, we have not found out who he is. You have fought with him. Can you guess anything? Outside the pavilion, a cold wind suddenly rose. Fan Xian's back suddenly became numb. A drop of sweat rolled down his neck and dripped down the inside of his undershirt. He did not know what the emperor's real purpose was, but he felt that if he was not careful, he would lose everything. The white-clothed swordsman was the shadow. No matter what reason Qin Pingping had for setting up this trap, he would not tell the emperor the truth before he told Fan Xian. But if the emperor vaguely guessed this, how should he answer? If he said he did not know, would it shake the position he had worked so hard to establish in the emperor's heart? It was only a moment of shock, but Fan Xian concealed it well. Your Majesty, didn't you say that the white-clothed swordsman was Sigu Jian's younger brother? The emperor laughed coldly. Back in the day when Dongyi was in chaos, Sigu Jian's sword was merciless. He killed who knows how many of his own family members. It is said that one of his brothers escaped. I guessed it. That day on the tall building, that brilliant sword strike, If it were not for Sigurjien's sword will, I'm afraid my eyes would have been blinded. Fan Xian's heart was slightly at ease. He knew he had gambled correctly. He smiled and said, "It is a pity. If I could have had concrete evidence. Next year I would have used this excuse to send troops against Dongyi. My injury would have been worth it." These words scratched the emperor's itch. The emperor liked this kind of shameless method the most. He smiled and said, "After Sigurjien was cured by Fei Jie, he never acted like an idiot again." How could he admit to this? First, he did not admit that there was still a brother alive in this world. Then he sent a letter of credence, expressing shock and sympathy for the assassination attempt on me. He expressed disbelief at the viciousness of the assassin. As the middle-aged man spoke, he found that no one responded to his rare humor. Turning his head, he found that Fan Xian was looking at him seriously. The eunuch outside the pavilion was hunched over, not daring to make a sound. Looking at this scene, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He thought that after all these years, there was indeed no one else who dared to cause trouble with him as impudent as her. The emperor's mood was a bit dim. Slowly he opened his mouth and asked, "Fan Xian, that day upstairs, why did you save Pinger first?" Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair and asked for forgiveness. After a long silence, he replied, "In the situation at that time, if I had come to your Majesty's side, I would only have been able to block the sword in front and not the knife behind me. The third prince was in danger." The emperor smiled self-mockingly. "Is my life not as valuable as Pinger's?" Fan Xian smiled bitterly and once again asked for forgiveness. "I deserve to die. At the time, the situation was tense and I didn't react in time. By the time you rushed in front of me, the initiative had already been lost. Were you not afraid of death?" Fan Xian thought for a moment and then finally said these treasonous words. He looked into the emperor's calm eyes and said bitterly, "At the time, I was thinking that if I could block that sword with my little life, it would be great. If I couldn't, to be able to go with your majesty to another world to see the scenery, that could be considered a great honor." The emperor paused slightly and then laughed loudly. His laughter shook the sky and traveled far outside the pavilion. The eunuchs and serving girls waiting in the corner of the garden in the royal palace heard the emperor's rare happy laughter and couldn't help but look at each other. They didn't know what joke Commissioner Fan had told to make the emperor so happy. The emperor stopped laughing. The more he looked at the familiar expression between Fan Xian's brows, the more comforted he felt. Slowing his voice, he said, "On this trip to Jiangnan, be careful. Don't rush to the front for everything. I heard you were also as noisy in the north. You're a proper official, yet you don't know how to cherish your life." Fan Xian felt slightly embarrassed. He knew the emperor's words were reasonable. Of the officials of a country, how many would be as accustomed to taking risks as he was in the past? However, deep in his bones he liked to travel alone. When all was said and done, it was because he didn't trust others. However, there were still a few months until the Jiangnan trip. The emperor's parting edict seemed to have come a bit too early. "Your Majesty." Fan Xian thought of an important matter and said uneasily, "What you said earlier at Yi Guiping's place, was it a naughty joke?" The emperor glared at him and said coldly, "An emperor does not joke." Fan Xian was terrified. "I'm not old and have little prestige. How can I be the teacher of a prince?" The emperor smiled and looked at him. "I heard, when you were in Shangjing in northern Qi, that little emperor respected you very much. As for prestige, even Zhuang Mohan praised you. Why can't I be the teacher? The northern Qi grand tutor is only a junior of Zhuang Mohan. If it wasn't for the fact that you are truly too young, I would have directly issued an edict for you to enter the palace to lecture. Who would dare to say anything? But..." Fan Xian somewhat regretted the illustrious reputation he had created out of his own vanity. Vexed, he said, "But I am going to Jiangnan next spring. It would not be good to delay the third prince's studies." The emperor waved his hand. "Take Pinger with you. I have already spoken with the Empress Dowager." Fan Xian opened his mouth wide and didn't say anything for a long time. "Do well," the emperor said with a calm expression. "After the Jiangnan matter, stay in the capital for another 2 years. I will let you enter the Hall of Governmental Affairs." He stared into Fan Xian's eyes and said in a gentle tone, "I do think highly of you." After a moment of silence, Fan Xian nodded his head without any pretense. He knew that the conversation was over, so he prepared to take his leave and go home. Unexpectedly, the emperor waved his hand again and lightly said, "Today is the beginning of winter. There is a banquet in the palace. You can eat in the palace. I have already sent someone to your home to pick up water." Fan Xian's heart jumped again. He didn't know what this meant or if it didn't explain anything. "The Empress Dowager wants to see you," the Emperor said. He coughed again to cover it up. "She wants to see what exactly Wanner's husband looks like." The Emperor sat in the royal carriage and left. The pavilion quieted down. Only Fan Xian and the little eunuch responsible for pushing the wheelchair remained. Fan Xian watched the direction the Emperor left in. A cold self-mockery flashed through his eyes. Although it had happened suddenly, he still had some hope that the middle-aged man would let him see that painting. Perhaps the middle-aged man would say something to him? Who would have thought that in the end, it would still be this kind of benevolent and loyal subject? There was a faint disappointment in his heart. The royal family had always been heartless. He knew this, and he had never seen the middle-aged man as his father. The so-called disappointment was actually just disappointment for that woman called Yi Qingmei. Looking at the Emperor's attitude toward him, he knew that he was a fickle person. At least, toward his mother, he did not have a heart of gratitude or enough remembrance. In other words, even if the Emperor now had complete trust in him, even if he already saw him as his closest official, he was still only an official. If one day his identity was revealed, he would no longer be a loyal official who protected the Emperor, and it would involve the ownership of that chair. Fan Xian smiled coldly in his heart. He had no interest in being the Emperor. Being the commissioner of the Overwatch Council was an interest he had raised since he was young. Whether or not he wanted to be was his problem. Whether or not the middle-aged man would let him stand in the order was a problem of morality. *CK. I don't want to talk about you. After venting his anger by cursing the Emperor's mother, Fan Xian took a deep breath. He knew that his gloominess was indeed unreasonable. Because Lady Ning was a Dongyi prisoner of war, the great prince had been automatically stripped of his right to inherit the throne by many people. Furthermore, he was a character who could not see the light of day. Furthermore, there must have been some loose ends left in his mother's strange death, which was why the Emperor did not dare to acknowledge him until now. What confused Fan Xian was that, from the day he had guessed his identity, he had given up on the idea. Why did he suddenly care so much about it today? With a soft drip, a drop of snow water dripped down from the eaves of the pavilion and softly hit the stone steps. The sound startled Fan Xian. He raised his eyes to gaze at the early winter scenery outside the pavilion and sighed. He thought to himself that perhaps it was because the environment in the palace was too oppressive that it made him think about those boring things that he did not need to think about. "Commissioner. Sir, there is still some time for dinner. The Emperor has instructed that you can wander as you please," the young eunuch Hongzhu said with his head lowered, but his voice trembled. He could wander as he pleased in the rear palace? He was not recuperating in the plum garden, so it was better not to break any taboos. Fan Xian shook his head. "I'll just watch from this pavilion." He noticed the young eunuch's voice and narrowed his eyes. They swept over the young eunuch's body like two small knives. This gaze made the young eunuch nervous. "Cold? Yes. Sweating? Yes." The corners of Fan Xian's lips twitched and he smiled. "Don't be afraid. Since the Emperor is at ease letting you listen here, naturally he trusts you." That was true. The conversation between the Emperor and Fan Xian in the pavilion seemed like a normal family affair, but the information hidden within was very rich. For the first time, Hongzhu learned that the battle between the Overwatch Council and the Second Prince, as well as the matter of the palace treasury, had been tacitly approved by the Emperor. Commissioner Fan was incomparably intelligent and had secretly agreed with the Emperor's actions. And it seemed that Commissioner Fan was about to make some big move again. If these things got out of the palace, it would probably cause a huge uproar. "I'm not afraid," Hongzhu replied pitifully. Fan Xian looked at the young eunuch's pitted face and suddenly asked curiously, "Eunuchs also have pimples?" "Pimples?" Hongzhu was slightly startled and immediately understood what he meant. Somewhat annoyed, he replied, "I'm not sure either." It was quiet outside the pavilion. In the distance there were palace maids moving about. All around, the cold lake was cold and awe-inspiring. There was a gentle breeze coming from the lake, entering the pavilion and circling around his body. Slightly calming the irritation in his heart, Fan Xian smiled. "You are Hongzhu?" Recommending the urban lifestyle novel Snake and Scorpion. The author is richly carved. It tells the story of a strong woman in the business world. Everyone is welcome to collect, click, and recommend. The link is here. http://mmconfio. Book. SP. BL_ID equals 151,321. Chapter 317. Hongzhu had not thought that even the commissioner would know his name. His face immediately felt a bit of glory. He laughed and replied, "Yes, it must be difficult for the commissioner to know my name. His Majesty's close attendant is a vital point." Fan Xian said, "I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Of course I have to be careful. Furthermore, a few days ago an assassin appeared among the young eunuchs in Taiji Palace." Hongzhu was startled and didn't dare reply. Fan Xian warmly said, "Since the emperor trusts you, then I trust you as well. Right, I heard that old Dai is currently doing hard labor?" Hongzhu glanced at him and said probingly, "Yes, it's quite tragic." "Yes." Fan Xian nodded. "I'm not afraid of any taboos. I've had dealings with old Dai before and he's a good person. Please help me take care of him in the palace." Hongzhu was overjoyed. A month ago, he had been counting on being able to use eunuch Dai to make connections with this young official. Since the other party had said so, then there was hope. He quickly and respectfully replied, "How could I not follow your orders?" Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, "Sorry to trouble you. If there are any difficulties in the family in the future, just let me know." He didn't need to say it too clearly. The other party should know to contact him through Yi Guipin. When he returned to the Shufang Palace where Yi Guipin lived, it was a great coincidence that the great princess of Northern Qi, who had not had the opportunity to see him since September, had also returned from the Empress Dowager's palace. Before the great princess's marriage, she had been arranged to live in this palace. She looked at Fan Xian in the wheelchair and was slightly surprised. However, it was not convenient for the two of them to say anything, so they bowed slightly and retreated to the back. Yi Guipin glanced at Fan Xian. "You came all the way back from the north. Why do you feel so unfamiliar?" Fan Xian did not forget to gather allies and plant spies. How could he let go of someone as important as the great princess? However, in front of everyone he had to pretend to be unfamiliar with her. He replied, "Our identities are different. Besides, men and women are different." Yi Guipin teased, "Child, you're even more handsome than a great beauty. I'm not afraid of you harming others, but I'm afraid that others will provoke you." Fan Xian jumped in fright and said, "Aunt, don't talk nonsense." Turning his head, he saw that the third prince was still calmly copying books and pretending to be obedient. For some reason he felt angry. Shaking his head, he asked, "Did the Empress Dowager really allow this?" There was a tone of disbelief in his voice. Yi Guipin looked at him and nodded. Smiling, she said, "I only heard the emperor's permission today. However, this is a good matter. Why would the great ancestor object?" Fan Xian smiled self-mockingly, thinking that the matter was not so simple. He thought for a while and then said seriously, "If I go to Jiangnan, would you be willing to let Little San follow me? The people of Jiangnan are good and the scenery is good. What is there to be reluctant about?" Yi Guipin suddenly beckoned him closer. Fan Xian followed her words and moved closer. He was only a foot away from her, as if he wanted to smell the orchid scent this noblewoman exhaled. Only then did he hear her lower her voice and say through gritted teeth, "Take him as far away from the palace as possible. It's best if you can drag it out for as many years as you can." Fan Xian was slightly startled. Only now did he know that Yi Guipin had such a negative plan. He shook his head and said, "Blindly backing down is not a good thing. Besides, the Jiangnan Palace treasury doesn't need much effort. I'm just going to take a look. I can't always drag it out." Yi Guipin thought for a bit and found that this was indeed the case. She sighed with disappointment. These words are true. The emperor will not allow it. You're not always in Jingdo. Fan Xian thought for a bit and comfortingly said, "After all, third son is still young. It's not worth worrying so early. Besides, the Empress Dowager is in the palace watching over these grandsons. They wouldn't dare to do anything too out of line." He paused and then said, "After all, we're not the same as those other palaces. Shangshu Alley still has some strength to speak, and father won't retreat for a while. At the very least, there's still me, right?" With these words, Yi Guipin finally relaxed. Given the current trend of development, Fan Xian's influence in court would only grow. The court and the palace were often two independent circles influenced by the two ministers. As long as there were people in court, she and Li Qingping, mother and son, would have a much easier time in the palace. Having spoken to this point, everyone had already made their point very clear. In the eyes of Yi Guipin, who still retained a bit of likable straightforwardness, for the sake of her child, the tighter she was tied to the Fan family, the better. "Have third son come with me to Jiangnan, but there is one thing you have to promise me." Fan Xian glanced at the third prince, who was eavesdropping but couldn't hear anything. "What is it?" Seeing the seriousness in his words, Yi Guipin also became nervous. I don't really know how to be a teacher. As you know, those students that are sent out to the provinces are their good fortune after 10 years of hard work, Fan Xian said seriously. I can only teach your highness like a little brother. It's hard to avoid being disrespectful. Hearing the words, teach like a little brother, Yi Guipin beamed with joy. She had no idea of Fan Xi's wretched state in the north and nodded repeatedly. Fan Xian looked at her like he was looking at a fairy, wondering why she was so happy like she had won the lottery. Probingly he said, maybe, sometimes. I will fight. You can do whatever you want with your feet. Yi Guipin said straightforwardly and said with a smile, as long as nothing bad happens to me, I'll let you do whatever you want. She then sighed and said, you don't know, the incident at that brothel a few days ago gave me a big fright. Normally, I only knew that he was on good terms with the second prince. Who would have thought that the second prince, that bastard, would actually urge Ping to do that? Ping is so young, what does he know? In the end, he was still used as a knife by others. Fortunately, you quickly suppressed this matter. Otherwise, who knows how angry the emperor would be. Fan Xian smiled silently, thinking that this son of yours was not a kind person. Although he was only 8, the things in his mind were complicated. He then heard Yi Guipin say in a low voice, teach him to be more obedient. Even if he becomes the useless King Jing, at least he can have a lifetime of peace. Fan Xian listened to these words and couldn't help feeling a bit emotional. In this world only a mother was good. This line was indeed not wrong. A child without a mother was like a blade of grass. His own life experience also proved the truth of this line. It was still early before dinner time, and there was still no news from the Empress Dowager's palace. Fan Xian was happy to have the peace and quiet. He stayed in Shufang Palace and chatted idly with Yi Guipin. The two of them were relatives, so there were fewer taboos. Furthermore, in the entire Chile royal palace, it seemed that only Yi Guipin's palace still had some human touch. Servant greets Princess Qin. Following the crisp greetings of the serving girls in the outer room, Lin Wan rubbed her 2 small hands and walked in. Today she was wearing a jade-colored layered dress and a large red silk jacket. On the cuffs of her sleeves, there were 2 strands of fox fur. It was furry and cute. Fan Xian sat in the wheelchair and stretched out his hands. Wan'er moved forward and placed her hand in his warm palm. Her movements were very natural. Fan Xian gently rubbed the girl's slightly cold hands and asked curiously, you came just like that? The colors were similar to red and green. However, the red was a bit more vivid, and the jadeite exuded nobility. It was much more pleasing to the eye when worn on Wan'er's body. However, entering the palace to eat, one should always dress more gorgeously. Lin Wan'er pouted and said, I waited for you at home for a long time but no one came. Later, Su Wenmao called someone over to say something. Only then did I know you had been summoned into the palace. I brought the bao back to the manor. Just as we reached the door, we were stopped by a eunuch. We were dragged into the palace to see the Empress Dowager and Empress First. Fortunately, the other ladies were all serving in the Empress Dowager's palace, so we didn't have to go to each palace to pay our respects. We were in a hurry along the way and didn't have time to change. Right, where's the bao? Fan Xian was most concerned about his silly brother-in-law. Don't worry, Ruoruo is at home. Lin Wan'er accepted the hot towel the serving girl handed over and carelessly wiped her face. She sat down beside Yi Guipin and tilted her head with a smile. What are you talking about? Yi Guipin didn't rush to reply. She first scolded the serving girl a bit. Using a hot towel to let the princess wipe her face on such a cold day, she wasn't afraid that she would be stirred up by the cold wind when she went out later. Only then did she turn her head and smile as she recounted the emperor's arrangements. Lin Wan'er glanced at Fan Xian in astonishment. It settled just like that? Fan Xian nodded and shrugged his shoulders. There was nothing he could do. Dragging down his family, it looked like his trip to Jiangnan in the future would certainly be very exciting. A eunuch came to pass on a message inviting the 5 nobles of Shufang Palace to Hongguang Palace to eat. Yi Guipin quickly pulled the 3rd prince's hand to the back room to freshen up. She also had to dress herself well. Taking advantage of this time, Fan Xian lowered his voice and asked, the matter I told you to talk about with the Empress Dowager, how is it going? Lin Wan'er looked around and shook her head. In a quiet voice she said, you wanted to break off the engagement but you didn't discuss this with me earlier. Suddenly doing something like this, how could the Empress Dowager allow it? Besides, I am, after all, a junior. Talking about this matter is not very polite. Fan Xian sighed and said, if Ruoruo doesn't like it, what can I do as her brother? However, I did tell you about this matter a bit late. I wanted to take advantage of the Baoyue brothel incident. Hongqing is currently making the palace unhappy, so I wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to take care of this matter. I didn't think it would be so troublesome. The emperor has appointed a marriage. How can it be broken off just like that? Wan'er furrowed her brows. You spoil Ruoruo too much. Fan Xian chuckled and said, I only have this one sister. If I don't spoil her, who will? I think it's better for you to come into the palace. Wan'er stared at the back room and confirmed that no one was listening. Only then did she quietly say, let the old master directly tell the emperor that the two of us are not enough. Fan Xian said with distress, although the two families have fought like this, father really does like Hongqing. Even when Hongqing goes to the brothel every day, he doesn't think it's a big deal. He always says he watched him grow up and the two families are very close. He can't let the second prince cause the two families to separate. Lin Wan'er laughed and said, you used to be the most famous person in Lujing River. Of course you don't think this is a big deal. After saying this, she realized that it was inappropriate for a daughter-in-law to tease her father-in-law, so she laughed and covered it up. Fan Xian was worried about his sister, so he didn't make fun of her. His brows were full of helplessness. These days, Ruoruo had made a name for herself in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. He hoped that Haitang would be able to handle things well, or at least delay the marriage for a while. Why did uncle summon you into the palace? Lin Wan'er asked the question she really cared about. I'm afraid it's not just about the third prince. Fan Xian quietly looked at his wife. Suddenly he reached out his hand and gently stroked her smooth chin. He smiled and didn't say anything. Was she supposed to tell her that her dearest uncle had asked her dearest husband to use all his skills just to make her biological mother destitute? Fortunately Yi Guipin and the others had already dressed up and came out. Fan Xian turned to look and saw Yi Guipin and the great princess of Northern Qi walk out hand in hand. The two women with their jewelry, clothing and makeup shone brilliantly. Their features were like a painting, dignified and noble. He couldn't help but praise them in his heart. The so-called splendor of jewels was nothing more than this. The great princess looked at him and smiled. She walked out of the hall, shoulder to shoulder with Wan'er, whom she already knew. The winter solstice was as big as the new year. On this day, everyone in the Qin kingdom rested. The courts stopped, the army rested, the borders closed and the merchants rested. It wasn't just the capital. Even Northern Qi, far away in the north, was peacefully living a happy life. According to the customs of the Qin kingdom, mutton was to be eaten on the winter solstice. In the streets and alleys of the private residences in Jingdo, countless strands of hot fog floated up from the spacious or cramped kitchens. They circled around the various pots 3 times and then found the only way out, drilling through the cracks between the windows. The hot fog carried the pungent smell of dried chili, the gamey smell of fresh mutton, the strange smell of medicinal herbs and the sweet smell of carrots. The 4 scents mingled and were incomparably beautiful. They filled the streets and alleys of countless courtyards, making all who smelled them salivate. Inside Hongguang Palace, behind the table at the very end, Fan Xian stared with a pair of confused eyes. He looked at the mutton that had been cut into the shape of an ear with the tips of his chopsticks. He looked at the mushrooms and rare vegetables floating in the white soup in his bowl. He couldn't help but sigh in his heart. The mutton in the palace was indeed different from that of the common people. The workmanship was much more exquisite, but it also lacked the warmth of incense. Without tofu and carrots, how could he eat the mutton? The biggest problem was that the mutton was already warm. He couldn't burn his mouth and lips until they were numb. What would be the point of drinking it? So, he just barely finished the soup in his bowl and picked up some chopstick sauce to mix with the rice. He chewed slowly and carefully, delaying the time of this boring family feast. His eyes were focused on his nose was focused on his lips, and his lips held the tips of his chopsticks. He was incomparably focused, but the corners of his eyes didn't wander. He quietly listened to the conversation of the members of the royal family in the palace and didn't interrupt. He was as lonely as the wheelchair not far behind him. Hongguang Palace was the Empress Dowager's palace. It was the grandest building in the rear palace. Although it was much simpler than the Wastrel Royal Palace in Shangjing in northern Qi, it was still magnificent and majestic. The candlelight was like the sun, making the furnishings and objects in the palace shine. The members of the royal family in the palace ate silently, not daring to look directly at the old woman at the very top, as well as the emperor and empress beside her. On the winter solstice, everyone had arrived, including King Jing's family of 3 and the second prince, who was under house arrest. However, when the second prince and Hongqing saw Fan Xian enter, They were only slightly surprised. They didn't charge forward to kill him like a shrew. Fan Xian glanced at the old woman at the main table out of the corner of his eye. This was the first time he had seen the Empress Dowager. From the wrinkles on her face, it was as if he could still smell the old woman's methods and hard heart. Although the tiger was old, its ill might was still there. She sat at the very top. Even the usually impudent King Jing appeared much more well-behaved. He wasn't familiar with the people, but he was familiar with the palace. When he had played Thief Marshal Yi Liuxiang, he had walked through the palace twice and found the key in the secret compartment under the old woman's bed. Thinking of this matter, he quietly withdrew his gaze and silently ate the rice mixed with sauce. From above came a few feeble coughs from the old woman. Fan Xian lowered his head and didn't speak. Earlier, he had caught a glimpse of the Empress Dowager's expression and found that the corners of her lips were beginning to droop. He knew that this old woman didn't have many years left to live. "Chin girl, come sit beside me." The Empress Dowager looked at her granddaughter at the furthest table in the distance and then at Fan Xian, whose face was hidden in the shadows. She called out, "Give me a massage." Wana rose warmly and left her seat. With a smile, she walked over and whispered something into the Empress Dowager's ear. She then glanced at Fan Xian, who was bitterly eating the rice with soy sauce. She guessed that she was trying to make the old woman happy and tell her a joke. As expected, the Empress Dowager laughed and laughingly scolded, "Looks like you fed him well in the Fan manner. He can't even eat in the palace anymore." Although her voice was low, it clearly reached everyone's ears. They all knew that she was talking about Fan Xian. Fan Xian's heart jumped, and a smile bloomed on his lips. It seemed that it wasn't a lie that Wan was the most favored in the palace. As long as the Empress Dowager and the Emperor liked her, her position in the palace would naturally rise. But he still felt a little nervous. Today was the first time he had seen the Empress Dowager. The old woman occasionally glanced at him and it made him shiver. Logically speaking, a grandmother looking at a grandson shouldn't look at him like that. That look was very complicated. There was a glimmer of gratification, 2 parts pride, 3 parts doubt, and the remaining 4 parts vigilance and coldness. When the Empress Dowager spoke, everyone had already stopped eating. They were listening to what the old woman had to say at the winter solstice banquet. "Today, everyone has arrived. Last year I was not feeling well, so I didn't have the gathering. Today, seeing the prince consort, I am very happy." The Empress Dowager said she was happy, but there was no expression on her face. She turned to the Emperor and said, "But it's not good for your sister to stay alone in Xinjiang. Her daughter and son-in-law are both in the capital. I don't like her living in the Li Palace all the time." Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. He knew that they had finally reached the main topic. The meaning was clear. If he, the prince consort, could attend the royal banquet, why couldn't the eldest princess? The Emperor's deep eyes flashed. "The weather is cold and the roads are not easy to travel. When spring comes, let Yunrui come back." Hearing these words, the Empress Dowager nodded her head in satisfaction. Fan Xian noticed that the second prince's left sleeve trembled unnaturally. Presumably, this pitiful friend of his, who had been punished by him, knew that reinforcements were about to arrive in the capital, and his heart was unbearably excited. But, why was the crown prince's expression a little strange? Fan Xian didn't pay much attention to what the Empress Dowager said after. The royal banquet was really boring. However, when he heard the Empress Dowager occasionally mention him, she purposely revealed a trace of coldness, which made the corners of his lips involuntarily reveal a trace of self-mockery. He had heard that when he was injured, the Empress Dowager had prayed for him, and that he had received the pearl from the Empress Dowager. He had thought that the old woman's heart had softened, and that his hard heart had also softened. Unexpectedly, looking at the situation, it was just a blind guess. Forget it, let's see whose heart is harder. You people from the royal family are naturally cold-hearted. I'm a monster who's lived 2 lives, so my heart won't be soft either. At least it's harder than the mutton in the cold soup. Since the ruler was not the ruler, the official was not the official, the father was not the son, the ancestor was not the grandson, did he need to be afraid of that groundless blood relationship? Although he was a poet who plagiarized, Fan Xian was in the end a literary person. He could not shake off that sour and proud character. In this cold and deserted Hongguang palace, he straightened his body and back. Although he had a smile on his face, he did not purposely try to curry favor with the Empress Dowager, nor would he shamelessly pretend to be a junior for the amusement of the old woman's grandchildren. For a moment, the conversation in Hongguang Palace seemed awkward and cold. Other than the Empress Dowager, the ladies and princes in the palace were all familiar with Fan Xian. They knew that this son-in-law was not a simple character. When it came to making people happy, that was the little trick he was best at. Thus, they didn't understand why Fan Xian didn't take advantage of the family banquet to curry favor with the Empress Dowager. The emperor did not think much of it. He thought that Fan Xian was angry at the fact that his mother-in-law was returning to the capital and had lost his composure. The Empress Dowager thought that this young man was naturally arrogant, and she disliked him even more. Seeing this, the Empress did not understand what Fan Xian wanted to do. A trace of doubt appeared in the corner of her eyes. Under the Empress Dowager's slightly angry gaze, Lady Ning drank her wine boldly. Concubine Shu took a small sip, and Yi Guipin giggled foolishly to amuse the Empress Dowager, helping Fan Xian divert a few gazes. Among the others, the great prince was confused, the second prince was secretly amused, and the third prince was admiring him. The crown prince's mind wandered. Only King Jing's guess was a bit closer to the truth. He secretly shook his head, thinking that scholars really did tend to be a bit pedantic. Wan leaning against the Empress Dowager's side, looked at Fan Xian with some worry. In the cold night, snowflakes began to fall again. At the corner gate of the royal palace, Fan Xian sat in his wheelchair with his head slightly lowered. His expression was calm, as if he had nothing on his mind. Lin Wan was a bit worried. "Husband, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Fan Xian's head remained firmly lowered. "I was just pretending to be defaging." The Tiger Guards and the Chinian unit had arrived. The husband and wife boarded the carriage, which headed for Fan Manor. In the carriage, Lin Wan asked curiously, "Who is defaging?" "A man who has kept his head lowered all his life." Fan Xian laughed. "Let's not talk about him. Let's go home and eat some mutton. Father and the others should still be waiting." To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 318. About 4,000 li to the northeast of Qin Kingdom's Jingdo, in the even more ancient and brilliant Shangjing, the snowfall was extremely heavy. Snowflakes as thick as goose feathers fell to the ground. The streets and alleys of Shangjing seemed to be covered with a layer of pure white wool carpet. However, the snow did not accumulate on the manors with heated stoves. The black eaves of the houses were exposed, and the two contrasted particularly beautiful. From the city gate, one could see the palace built against the mountain in the distance. The pure black eaves of the palace were a deeper shade than the black eaves of the houses. On the snowy cliffs of the mountain, layers of winter trees were covered in frost and snow. The waterfalls had gradually softened into icy creeks. The stone paths were slanted and lonely. The winter mountain and the palace blended harmoniously. After the summer passed, many things happened in northern Qi. The most shocking was naturally the assassination of the provost of the Discipline Commission, Shen Zhong. Commander Shang Shanhu, who had galloped through the streets that night, was still under house arrest. The attitude of the court and the palace was clear. After Shen Zhong's death, he was immediately charged with numerous crimes. The Shen family was destroyed, and only Lady Shen, whom the people of Shangjing were familiar with, had suddenly disappeared without a trace. Shen Zhong's sudden death was a heavy blow to the embroidered uniform guards. The already weak Northern Qi Secret Service had been secretly dealt a blow by the young emperor. After losing a shrewd leader, they appeared even weaker. Even the Empress Dowager's voice had become much quieter. In the past few months, all the members of the Brocade Guard had been nervous. No one had come to take over the yamen, and no one knew how the court would deal with it. Fortunately, the court had finally issued a decree a few days ago. The son of Marquis Ningho, Wei Hua of the Honglu Temple, had officially taken over the position that Xinzhong had vacated. In the rumors of Shangjing, the Empress Dowager had wanted Marquis Ningho to be the provost, but the young emperor had refused. Now that the decree had clearly stated that Marquis Ningho's son would take the position, it inevitably caused some discussion. No one knew whether or not the mother and son, who quarreled every day, had finally come to some kind of tacit understanding and compromise. Today the Brocade Guard roused themselves, bringing out the fierceness and dominance of the past, and began to carry out a new mission. More than 100 Brocade Guards dressed in brown official robes surrounded Xiushui Street, allowing the snow to fall on them. Xiushui Street was not simple. The shops on it all had deep backgrounds, especially the 7 shops in the middle. They were all royal merchants of Qin. The two countries were currently in a honeymoon period. Perhaps he won't be able to climb back up again. The negotiations between the two countries in the summer let him know how cold and ruthless Fan Xian, this gentle and refined scholar, was. So much so that after he took over as the commander of the Brocade Guard, he immediately saw Fan Xian as his greatest enemy. He constantly thought about how to make Fan Xian unlucky. Now that he thought of this evil plan that would make it difficult for Fan Xian to rise again, he couldn't help but feel excited. He looked at the emperor with a face full of hope. What disappointed him was, the emperor still only shook his head. Take a longer view, the emperor said with a mocking tone. With a mocking tone, the emperor said, the goods of the Chui family are already within our borders. What is the use of seizing them? Do you think I care about the silver of these merchants? In the past, the court has always had dealings with the eldest princess. Both sides have received many benefits. Do you not understand the reason why we want to cooperate with Fan Xian this time? The emperor picked up the book on the table. As he read, he quietly said, the palace treasury of the southern court will soon belong to the Fan family. If you don't have enough confidence in destroying him, then it's best to be a bit more polite to him. The people of my country are still counting on Commissioner Fan to endlessly send cheap goods year after year. After Wei Hua left, the emperor's expression seemed to relax a lot in an instant. He stretched inelegantly and gave a big yawn. At this moment, a beautiful woman dressed in a luxurious palace dress lifted the curtain and walked out. Looking in the direction the new commander had left, she blinked and asked curiously, what were you talking about? It sounds like it has something to do with Fan Xian. Lily, every time you hear the name Fan Xian you get so nervous. Aren't you afraid I'll be jealous? The young emperor pulled her into his arms and said flirtatiously, Fan Xian made a move against Xinjiang in the south. Cooperated with him a little. It was not a little cooperation. The Chui family's route to the north had already been completely destroyed, and the goods and silver that had been left behind had all been seized by the Brocade Guard. A large clan famous for their business had one hand cut off, and the other hand within the Qin kingdom had long been completely cut off by the sinister and terrifying Overwatch Council. Lily giggled and replied, of course I'm nervous. Sir Fan is our matchmaker. The young emperor thought about it and agreed. If Fan Xian hadn't come up with such a strange idea, to have Ku He take Lily as a disciple, given Lily's background and identity, it would have been troublesome for her to enter the palace. What are you reading? Lily curiously snatched the book from the emperor's hands. The emperor panicked and snatched it back. Fan Xian specially sent me the latest chapter of the story of the stone. It's unique in the world. Don't ruin it. Lily smiled brightly and snuggled up to his side. How could Fan Xian dare to make a move against his own mother-in-law? The emperor shook his head. That bastard seems to be much more daring than I am. The palace in the south is much more complicated than here. Who knows? The noblest river in northern Qi was the Yuchuan River that flowed down from the mountains, circled around the royal palace, and then cut across the ancient city of Shangjing. The further up they went, the closer they got to the royal palace and the quieter it became. It was snowing heavily today, and ice shards could be seen on the banks of the river. It was bitterly cold. In a place where the black eaves of the royal palace could be seen and the winter trees in the mountains, there was a small garden. Who knew what kind of person could live there? A young man of about 13 or 14 was doing hard labor in the garden. The young man's face was slightly chubby. He pulled the grindstone in the garden and gritted his teeth as he spun it around. The grindstone squeaked, but his legs were trembling. In this cold winter weather, the clothes on his body were drenched in sweat. It was truly a pitiful sight. After spinning around a few times, the young man finally couldn't stand it anymore. He pushed the handle in his hand and turned his head. There are no beans again. Why do you want me to push this empty grindstone? Can't you even afford a donkey? The person he was cursing at was sitting leisurely under the eaves, lying on a deck chair with a thick mattress. Her bright and unobtrusive eyes were watching the snowflakes whizzing past outside the eaves. She seemed to be lost in thought. Hearing the young man's angry roar, she yawned and stood up. She put her hands on her hips and said lazily, "It's snowing today. Where can I buy beans? As for the donkey, don't I have you now? I sold the donkey a few days ago. The chickens and ducks in the garden also need to be kept warm in the winter. They need money." The two people in this strange situation were, of course, Fan Xizha, who had been exiled to northern Qi, and the most famous figure of northern Qi's younger generation, Haitang. Haitang wore a cotton jacket made of flowery cloth. Her hands were in her pockets. A trace of a smile flashed across her plain and unremarkable face. She looked at Fan Xizha and said, "Your brother sent me a letter a few days ago. He told me to discipline you well. It would have been better if she hadn't said it. Once she said this, Fan Xizhi finally went crazy. He had been in Shangjing for a few days, and in the end, he had done nothing but be forced to do hard labor by this village girl. Even Yenner had been sent away by her. This village girl's status was high, her martial arts were strong, and she was quick-witted. He had thought of escaping many times, but it had never worked. Life in Shangjing was incomparably bitter. Thinking of this, he angrily squatted down and scolded, "Who are you to me? What right do you have to discipline me?" Haitang smiled and didn't reply. She just lay back down and closed her eyes slightly, as if she was going to sleep to the accompaniment of the wind and snow. Fan Xizhi looked at her. He knew that if he didn't listen, he probably wouldn't even have food to eat. He could only grab the handle of the millstone again and hatefully gnash his teeth. "You look like a village girl and you still want to marry my brother? Don't think I'll recognize you as my sister-in-law in the future." My mood is difficult to calm. There are some things going on around me that I may not have enough time to write. Please understand. Thank you. Chapter 319. The snow was still falling. Fan Xizhi, who was by the stone mill in the garden, had finally completed 50 revolutions. Panting, he held onto the stone mill, feeling his entire body aching. He could not straighten his back. The sweat on his face turned into steam and rose, turning white in the face of the cold. It looked as if his entire body was smoking. "Wipe yourself, then change into dry clothes so you don't catch a cold." Haitang handed him a neat pile of clothes. Fan Xizhi shook his head angrily and went into the inner room to change. Not long after, he came out yelling, "There's no place to bathe. What should I do if I stink?" Haitang glanced at him and smiled. "It's winter, and the things your brother made haven't been shipped to Shangjing." Fan Xizhi couldn't help but shake his head again. "My brother drove me north, not to let you torture me." "An uncut jade is worthless," Haitang said calmly. "I remember when we were chatting in the royal palace, Fan Xian once said something that I thought was very reasonable." "What did he say?" Fan Xizhi asked curiously. "When heaven is about to place a great responsibility on a man, it first torments his will, strains his muscles and bones, starves his skin, empties his body and messes up his actions. Thus, the heart is moved and one can do what one cannot." Actually, when Fan Xian said these words, he was thinking of the northern seashore, the crabapple spring scene among the reeds. But Fan Xizhi and Haitang did not know of that person's filthy thoughts. Fan Xizhi heard these words and felt a chill rush to the top of his head. In a trembling voice he said, "Tonight, you won't have dinner yet, will you?" Haitang smiled slightly. "We won't be eating here tonight." As they spoke, someone outside the garden respectfully said, "Second young master, I will be the host tonight." Fan Xizhi was surprised that this person had responded so naturally. He turned his head and saw that it was Wang Qinian. Unexpectedly meeting a family member in a foreign land, thinking of the suffering these days, and thinking of the possibility of escaping the abyss of misery, Fan Xizhi's expression was excited. With a strange cry, he rushed over the fence. "After dinner you still have to come back." Haitang's words drifted down from behind. Her words pierced through the wind and snow and burrowed into Fan Xizhi's ears, causing him to shiver in incomparable disappointment. When he reached the fence, he turned around and shouted fiercely, "I came to Shangjing to earn money. I'm not here to be a coolie." Haitang had already returned to her reclining chair. Expressionlessly she said, "How can 1,000 taels of silver become 10,000 so easily? I feel that Fan Xian is pushing you too hard. Don't forget, your silver is all in my hands now." Outside the fence, Wang Qinian gave Fan Xizhi a meaningful glance, indicating that it would be best if he did not offend Lady Duo. Even Sir Fan Jr. did not have a complete corpse in her hands. "Why did you have to do this?" Fan Xizhi snorted angrily and pushed open the gate. Wang Qinian smiled and bowed to Haitang under the eaves. "Miss Haitang, I'll go now." Haitang looked at him and suddenly calmed down. After a while she said, "Sir Wang, are you really in such a hurry to let him take over the Chui family?" Wang Qinian's heart trembled. He had not expected her to even know of Commissioner Fan's arrangements. He did not know how much understanding Fan Xian and Haitang had. He could only smile bitterly. "What are you talking about, miss?" Haitang of course knew about Fan Xizhi's arrangements. She smiled slightly and said nothing more. She only warned, "We've just begun. Don't be too impatient." Wang Qinian had his subordinates bring Fan Xizhi a bamboo hat and a snow cloak. On one hand it was to block the wind and snow, On the other, it was to hide his appearance. Then he bowed to Haitang and prepared to leave the fields next to the palace. Did you also read the most recent letter? Haitang reclined in her chair and looked at Wang Qinian, who was about to leave, with a smile that was not a smile. Hearing this, Wang Qinian was startled. He smiled bitterly. It is my duty. Miss Haitang, please forgive me. In the letter, please say a few words on behalf of me so that the commissioner will not bully my daughter. Haitang laughed. This Honglu Temple of the Qin Kingdom's resident officer in northern Qi, Sir Wang Qinian, was indeed an interesting person. It was quiet outside the garden. Just like that, Haitang closed her eyes and fell asleep on the chair. Today in Shangjing the wind and snow were intertwined. The wind whistled past and the air was cold. The village girl slept very peacefully in such a cruel environment. There seemed to be a slight smile at the corner of her lips. With her astonishing cultivation, she was not surprised by the cold invading her body. On the contrary, she was closer to nature than ordinary people, such as the gentle nature of spring, or the harsh world of winter. Snow, piece by piece, gradually filled the sky. Under the eaves, the girl in a flowery jacket slept very comfortably. After an indeterminate amount of time, Haitang slowly opened her eyes. Her clear eyes reflected the falling snow outside the eaves, and the growing ice on the eaves. She could not help but feel a flash of joy and satisfaction. Teacher, you're here. Outside the garden, on the stone path beside the Yuchuan River, a thick layer of snow had long been laid. At this moment, a person was slowly treading on the snow. The wind and snow seemed to have disappeared in an instant. One could only hear the rustling sound of each step landing on the snow. The person's feet were not wearing shoes. He stepped on the snow like this, determined and sincere. In a moment he had reached the front of the garden. Stretching out a hand, he gently pushed open the fence door and walked directly to the eaves. He stretched out a palm and gently stroked the happy Haitang's head. I've come to see you. One of the 4 great grandmasters in the world, Imperial Advisor Ku He, who was viewed as a god by the people of the world. If Fan Xian saw this scene, he would certainly silently criticize the other person's appearance for being so ordinary and unremarkable. He was far worse than Marshal Zhu. He couldn't even compare to Yi Liuyun's elegance of riding a boat halfway across the waves. Particularly after he took off the straw hat on his head and revealed his large bald head, there was not a glimmer of an otherworldly feeling. He was just a simple and common old man. However, the pure white plain clothes on his body and his bare feet declared his identity as an ascetic monk. Ever since he returned from the temple, he had not undergone a single ascetic monk. Haitang bowed deeply to her teacher with incomparable respect. Then she invited the most powerful figure in the world into the room and served tea. Like a little girl, she sat on the ground beside him with a face full of innocence. Only in front of this great grandmaster would Haitang be so obedient and natural. Ku He's face was thin. His lips were very thin. His eyes were very sunken, but his gaze was even more distant. With a trace of tenderness, he looked at his true disciple and smiled slightly. I come from Shi Mountain. Haitang's expression changed. She asked in surprise, have you found Sir Shaoan's body? Ku He slowly put down the teacup in his hand. With a trace of a smile in his eyes, he said, in a cave between the precipices, I found the remains of an old friend. Haitang furrowed her brows. The precipices of Shi Mountain? After Ku He returned from the south, he did not come out of seclusion. Some people in northern Qi guessed that this great grandmaster should have been injured, but they did not know who the other side of that terrifying battle that took place in an unknown place was. Some guessed it was Sigu Jian, some guessed it was Yi Luyun, and some guessed it was the Qin Kingdom's most deeply hidden great grandmaster. No one would have thought that he and Wu Zhu had both been injured. After Ku He recovered, the first thing he did was carefully investigate Shaoan's movements after he returned to the kingdom. Although this great grandmaster was faintly angry at the battle between the mother and son in the royal palace, Tianyi Dao followed the customs of the temple and rarely interfered in political affairs, so it was not good for him to say too much. But regarding Shaoan's life and death, this great grandmaster, who seemed to be unable to care about external things, placed great importance on it. The precipices of Shi Mountain had been searched many times, but Shaoan's body had not been found on the mountain. This became the most piercing problem for the northern Qi court. If that old man was still alive, then perhaps Shang Shanhu, who was under house arrest in his manor, would become active again. But for Haitang, since Brother Lang Tiao said that Shaoan had lost all signs of life after being stabbed by the curved knife, she would naturally believe him. Great Grandmaster Ku He had never doubted the judgment of his first disciple. So the northern Qi people were only thinking about one question. Where was Shaoen's body? No one knew how much effort they had expended in their search. Qi Mountain had been turned upside down, but they still could not find the whereabouts of Xiao En and the mysterious man. After all, the northern Qi people could not understand how in this world there could be someone like a gecko who could climb up the mirror-like precipices of Qi Mountain. Later, it was Imperial Advisor Ku He who spoke, and the northern Qi people resentfully stopped their search. They did not think that this great grandmaster would lower his status and personally go investigate. No one knew how much effort Ku He had put in before he finally found Xiaoen's body in a cave in the precipice on this windy and snowy day. Haitang looked at her teacher in shock. Only now did she notice that there were small wounds on his ankles. She asked with concern, "How can you get down from that precipice?" She was not in a rush to ask Xiaoen questions. What she was most concerned about was Ku He's health. After all, her teacher was old and had just recovered from his injuries. Ku He gently shook his head and smiled with a sigh. "Going down is a bit troublesome, but it's not impossible. All we need to do is tie a rope. I just didn't think that the person Lang Qiao forced down the precipice would be able to escape so easily." Haitang lowered her head slightly. Perhaps he was carrying something like a grappling hook on his body. The grappling hook has no place to borrow strength. Ku He looked at her with a smile. "You were so shocked earlier because you remembered what the precipice of Qi Mountain looked like." Haitang sighed. "I really don't understand this matter. But it's already been a few months. Could it be that Sir Xiaoen's remains have not been eaten by the eagles in the mountains?" Ku He's snow-like eyebrows fluttered slightly. He warmly said, "That cave was very shallow. Logically speaking, vicious birds should have long since helped Sir Xiaoen ascend to the heavens. I didn't think that when I followed the rope down, what I saw was Sir Xiaoen's remains as good as new. There were a few dead birds lying beside him. The birds had all turned to bones, but his body, aside from being a bit dehydrated, had not rotted." Haitang was surprised to hear this. She smiled calmly. "What a powerful poison." Ku He gently nodded and changed the subject. "Tell me about this young man, Fan Xian. I'm very curious about him." Haitang's heart skipped a beat, but her expression did not change in the slightest.